There's something different about the highways of West Texas. If you've ever driven them alone at night, you know what I mean. Endless asphalt. No lights, no houses, just the low hum of your engine and that feeling that something out there is pacing you through the dark. This video is called 20 Disturbing Stories from Lone Drivers in West Texas. These are real accounts from people who've experienced terrifying things on those forgotten stretches between towns, truckers, travelers, and locals who swear they've seen what waits beyond the reach of their headlights. From phantom cars that vanish mid-chase to voices that whisper names over the CB, these stories prove one thing: you don't need a haunted house to find horror. Out here, the road itself remembers. You're watching Creepy Vibes, where every story is rooted in real events, and every detail drags you a little deeper into the dark side of Texas. Before we start, here's something wild. Almost 90% of the people who watch these videos never subscribe. I'm trying to reach 6,000 subscribers this month, and you can help make that happen. So if you love true horror stories and want more every night, hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights and get comfortable. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now let's roll down those empty West Texas highways and find out why some drivers never made it home. The first time I noticed it, I figured I was just tired. I'd been hauling out of El Paso since before dawn. A double load of drilling supplies headed for Sanderson, and the sun had already baked the cab into a slow oven. When I hit the stretch between Marathon and Sanderson, there wasn't another set of headlights in sight. Just that long two-lane ribbon stretching across the desert, heat mirage dancing like water ahead of me. The mile markers kept me company. Green signs flashing by every few minutes, 1 to 67, 1 to 66, 165. They were the only proof that I was getting somewhere. It started after I passed marker 158. I glanced down at the fuel gauge, decided I could make Sanderson without filling up, and settled into that trance you get after hours behind the wheel. When I looked up again, I saw the same green sign, 158. I thought maybe I'd misread the first one, so I waited for the next. 157, that was right. But then a few miles later, 158 again. I frowned, leaned forward in my seat and stared out at the road. Same slope on the shoulder, same leaning mesquite trees, same bent guardrail. It wasn't just the sign. Everything looked identical. Even the flattened armadillo by the yellow stripe was still there. Truckers talk about road hypnosis, how your brain loops when you're too tired. I figured that was it. I rolled the window down, let the wind slap my face, and turned on the CB to break the silence. Static. I switched channels. Nothing but faint crackles. Then I caught a voice for half a second, like someone whispering behind me. Not words, just a low hum that slid into the static and vanished. I checked my clock. It was 8:47 p.m. I decided to note the time just to prove to myself I was moving. 10 minutes later, I should have hit 148 if I was really driving at speed. When I saw another marker, I squinted at it through the glare of my headlights. 158. I said it out loud. No way. I pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching, engine idling rough. The desert was silent except for the cooling tick of the engine. No wind, no bugs, nothing. I climbed down, boots hitting the dust, and walked back to the sign. It was clean, fresh paint, no bullet holes, no rust. The reflective numbers caught the light when I moved my flashlight across them. 158, I touched it. The metal was warm, as if it had been sitting in the sun minutes ago, not cooling in desert night. I got back in and started driving again. The truck felt heavy, like I was dragging something invisible behind me. I checked the mirrors. The rear trailer lights were fine. The sky was cloudless, the kind of black that makes you feel like the stars are staring back. I passed the same billboard for a hunting lodge twice. I knew it because of the half-peeled corner with the picture of a deer. The third time I saw it, I said the words under my breath, "That's not possible." At 9:10 p.m., I saw lights ahead, headlights, or maybe tail lights disappearing over a hill. I pressed down on the accelerator to catch up. The road stretched, but I never got closer. The lights blinked out like someone flipped a switch. When I crested the rise, the highway was empty again. The sign waiting for me at the bottom read 158. I laughed out loud, a dry sound that didn't feel real, and kept driving. I don't know when I started seeing shapes in the dark. Maybe around the fifth loop. Shadows along the bar ditch, tall and thin, keeping pace with the truck. I told myself it was the mesquite, the way they move when your headlights swing. but one of them turned its head. I saw the gleam of eyes, 2 pinpoints reflecting light that wasn't mine. I hit the brakes hard enough to make the trailer sway, and the figure vanished. I waited, heart thudding, sweat cold on my neck. When nothing moved, I shifted back into gear. The radio clicked to life without me touching it. A man's voice came through, calm, measured, like a weather report. Southbound past marker 158. You missed your turn. Then static swallowed it again. I shouted into the CB, asked who was on the line, what channel this was. No answer. Just that hiss like breathing. At 9:42, I tried turning around. The road was straight enough to pull a U, and I figured if I'd somehow missed a junction or detour, heading back north would break the spell. I turned, drove what felt like 15 miles, and watched the numbers climb. 160, 161, 162. Relief flooded me until I saw the next sign. 158. I gripped the wheel, felt the vibration of the engine under my palms, and realized the road hum sounded almost like a voice whispering the numbers with me. I stopped counting after that. The odometer said I'd gone 400 miles since El Paso, but I should have hit Sanderson hours ago. The stars hadn't moved. I hadn't seen a single car since those vanished lights. Every time I checked the clock, it read 9:47. I must have stared at it 20 times before I accepted that it wasn't changing. At some point, the fuel gauge dipped into red. I slowed down, rolled onto the shoulder, and killed the lights. The darkness outside pressed against the glass heavier than it should have been. I thought I heard footsteps crunching gravel, slow and steady, coming up the driver's side. My hand hovered near the door handle. When the sound stopped, I flicked on the headlights. The beam hit the sign right in front of me. 158. Something stood behind it, just tall enough that the top of its head showed above the metal edge. The light caught pale skin. No face, just a smooth curve where features should be. I blinked and it stepped backward, disappearing into the dark like it had sunk into the ground. I didn't wait. I slammed the truck into gear and drove, pedal to the floor, until my arms ached from gripping the wheel. The last thing I remember before I must have blacked out was the sound of my tires grinding over gravel and a voice on the radio whispering, "Almost there." When I opened my eyes again, daylight was bleeding across the desert. I was parked outside a diner in Sanderson. My hands were shaking, dust coating the dashboard. I stumbled inside, ordered coffee, and asked the waitress what time it was. She said 9:47. When I went back out to the truck, the mile marker in front of the lot caught my eye, 158. I asked her about it later, trying to sound casual. She said that marker doesn't exist near town. Closest one's 30 miles north, and she swore the highway's been rerouted since the late 90s. Sometimes I think I still hear that stretch calling when I'm out driving at night. The hum of tires blending into a low whisper. I don't take that road anymore. But every once in a while the GPS jumps and the screen flashes green for a split second, showing me a pin right in the middle of nowhere, labeled simply, Mile 158. The rain had been coming down for hours, steady and cold, drumming against the windshield in a rhythm that matched the dull ache behind my eyes. It was past midnight and I was the only car for miles on FM 170, a thin, twisting stretch of blacktop that ran along the Rio Grande like a forgotten scar through the desert. I'd been driving since Lajitas, trying to make it to Presidio before the storm got worse. Out there, the land folds into itself, rock, scrub, and sand, with nothing but the hum of your own engine to remind you that civilization still exists somewhere. I saw her around mile marker 48. At first, I thought it was a trick of the headlights, a shimmer of pale movement caught in the sheets of rain. But then she stepped into the beam right in front of me, waving both arms like she was trying to flag down an ambulance. I slammed on the brakes. My tires screeched, and for a second the truck fishtailed before settling just a few yards from her. She didn't move, just stood there on the edge of the bridge, soaked through, hair plastered to her face, her white dress clinging to her legs. She couldn't have been more than 17. I rolled down the window and shouted over the rain, "You all right?" She didn't answer. Her mouth moved, but the thunder drowned her out. I got out, letting the cold hit me like a wall. The air smelled like mud and iron. "You need help?" I called again, stepping closer. Her lips trembled and she pointed down toward the river. "My car," she said, voice thin and broken. "It went off the road. My brother, he's still in there." I looked where she pointed. The bridge stretched out maybe 50 feet over a swollen current that used to be a lazy creek. The rain had turned it into a brown, churning flood. I couldn't see any headlights below. No sign of wreckage, just water slamming against the concrete pylons. "Stay here," I said, already moving toward the edge. "I'll take a look." When my flashlight hit the far side, something gleamed. A twisted bit of metal caught on a branch near the bank. It looked like part of a bumper. "Hang on," I said, turning back to her, but she wasn't there. I spun in a full circle. The bridge was empty, the road behind me swallowed in rain. I called out, "Hey, where'd you go?" My voice came back thin, almost swallowed by the storm. I ran back to the truck, opened the door, and grabbed the spotlight from under the seat. I swept it across the bridge and the water below. Nothing. Just the endless shimmer of rain. That's when my beam hit a sign half buried in mud on the shoulder. I hadn't noticed it before. It was bent backward, rust eating through the white paint, but the words still reflected when the light caught them. "Bridge out since 1993. I froze. The bridge stretched solid under my feet. Concrete, railings, the whole thing looked new. But the sign, hell, it looked older than me. I shined the light down again and saw, for just a split second, the same girl standing waist-deep in the flood, her hands pressed to the window of something half-submerged. The current twisted her hair around her face. Then she was gone, along with the shape under the water. I backed up, heart hammering. My boots splashed through puddles as I stumbled to the truck. I threw myself inside and started the engine. The headlights cut across the rain and hit the bridge again. This time it wasn't there. The beams lit only empty air and a black drop into the river below. The pavement just stopped, jagged and broken, a cliff of asphalt ending in nothing. I killed the engine and sat in the dark, listening to the rain hammer the roof. My chest felt tight, like something heavy was sitting on it. I looked out again. The bridge hadn't vanished, it had never been there. I could see where the road had collapsed decades ago, the edges eaten by weeds. My truck had stopped less than 3 feet from the edge. When I finally got my breath back, I shifted into reverse and backed up slow, headlights trembling over the wet pavement. The flood roared below, louder than before. I could have sworn I heard something in it, not just water, but a voice, faint and pleading, calling for help over and over. By the time I reached Terlingua, the rain had eased. I pulled into a small gas station that looked half abandoned and parked under the awning. The clerk inside looked about 70, his face drawn and pale under the fluorescent lights. I told him what I'd seen. He didn't say anything at first, just stared through me like I was describing a dream he'd had years ago. Finally, he said, "You mean the bridge on FM 170? I nodded. He rubbed his chin. "That thing washed out back in '93. 2 kids went over during a flash flood. Brother and sister. Folks found the car a week later, caught on a tree downstream. Never found the boy." I told him I'd seen her. He shook his head slowly. "You and half the county," he said. "Every few years somebody swears they saw a girl in white out there waving for help. My cousin almost drove straight into the river chasing her lights. Sheriff put up new signs, but they wash out every storm." I sat there for a while after that, drinking burnt coffee and trying to stop my hands from shaking. The rain had stopped completely by then, leaving that heavy stillness that comes after a storm. When I finally drove off again, I made sure to take the long route north through Alpine. I didn't want to see that bridge again or whatever was left of it. But here's the thing. When I got home to Midland 2 days later, I washed the mud off the truck. As I hosed down the wheel wells, I saw something caught behind the bumper, a strip of fabric, white and soaked with river mud. I pulled it free. It was part of a dress, thin and torn, and even after I left it hanging to dry, it never lost that smell of rain and iron, like the river was still clinging to it. A month later, the county finally put up new barriers and warning lights along that stretch of FM 170. They said a storm had taken out part of the embankment again, but when I saw the photos in the paper, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There was a fresh set of tire tracks stopping right at the edge, the same way mine had. No mention of a missing driver. No car found. I threw the strip of fabric away after that, or thought I did. Last week I was cleaning out the glove box and I found it again, folded neatly like someone had placed it there. Still damp, still cold to the touch. I'm done driving at night on that highway, but sometimes when I wake up around midnight I can still hear the rain and that voice calling from somewhere far below, begging for help that will never come. The first thing I noticed when I pulled into rest stop 27A was how quiet it was. For a stretch of I-10 just outside of Azona, that was unusual. Truckers normally parked in a neat line under the sodium lamps, their rigs humming through the night like metal beasts sleeping light. But tonight the lot sat under a low fog, pale and soft, curling around the lamppost like smoke from an unseen fire. I'd been driving since Midland, fighting off exhaustion and caffeine jitters, so when I saw the blue highway sign promising restrooms, vending machines, and a safe pull-off, it felt like salvation. I parked my old Ford between two sedans, locked the doors, reclined the seat, and told myself I'd nap just 20 minutes. I remember the sound of my blinker ticking as I turned the key off. The wind outside was almost musical, high and whistling. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to a radio. A soft hiss of static was drifting from one of the other cars. My windshield was fogged and the dashboard clock read 3:12 a.m. My head was heavy. I rubbed my eyes, sat up, and felt that wrongness you get when you oversleep in an unfamiliar place. Everything outside was washed in that orange vapor light, unreal and too still. I pushed the door open and stepped out. The air was cold, sharp enough to bite. My boots clicked against the asphalt. The first thing I noticed was that every other car had its door open. Driver's doors, a truck cab, a minivan, a family sedan, each one gaping like an empty mouth. Radios murmured faintly from some of them, different stations overlapping, old country from one, a preacher's voice from another, a woman laughing from yet another, all at low, broken volume. I called out. Just one word. Hello? It came out too loud, echoing off the vending machine hut and bouncing back at me. No one answered. I started walking, half expecting someone to sit up and wave me off, tell me it was some prank or mechanical thing. But as I passed each vehicle, my stomach tightened. Coffee cups sat in holders, still half full. A child's blanket was draped across a booster seat in the van. A pair of glasses lay on the concrete beside a Prius, one lens cracked. Inside a pickup, the dash cam blinked red, recording nothing but the empty lot. I went up the walkway toward the restrooms. The automatic lights inside flickered on as I entered, bathing the tiled walls in a sterile glow. There was a purse on the counter, unzipped, phone still charging beside it. The air dryers were silent. No sound but the faint hum of fluorescent tubes. I checked each stall. Empty. By then, a noise had started behind me. A soft chorus, radios shifting channels at once. Not loud, just that scattered sound of tuning knobs turning themselves. Country giving way to static. Static giving way to a man whispering scripture, then to silence again. I walked back out. Every car door was still open. That was when I noticed the lights. Not the lampposts. Those were steady. But something flashing faintly out in the fog, past the tree line where the picnic tables were. It looked like the glow of taillights seen through mist, 2 at first, then 4, then gone. I stood still, breath showing, heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. There was an urge to shout again, to break that thick quiet, but some instinct told me not to. Instead, I moved toward the vending area, hoping maybe someone was there. As I rounded the corner, the motion light snapped on again and revealed a man's jacket draped over one of the benches. I picked it up automatically, felt the warmth in the lining. Still warm, I backed away. The sound changed again. The radios were fading one by one, cutting out until only one remained. A soft, steady hum from my own truck. I hadn't left it on. I turned back toward it, every step slower than the last. The fog had thickened, coiling around the vehicles, muting their shapes until they were just silhouettes. When I reached the driver's side, I saw my door was open now too. The key still in the ignition, radio softly playing. The song was one I didn't recognize, something old. A woman's voice singing about coming home. I leaned inside and turned it off. The song stopped, but her voice didn't. It hung in the air for a full second longer, like it had been outside the speakers. The silence that followed felt heavier than sound. I could feel the lot watching me, if that makes sense, like each car was turned slightly in my direction, listening. I started the engine. The dashboard clock blinked 3:12 a.m. again, the same minute as before. I threw it into reverse, heart pounding, but the headlights hit nothing but fog. The exit ramp should have been visible from there. Instead, the beam ended 10 feet out, swallowed by white. I pressed forward anyway, following what I thought was the driveway out. The asphalt stretched on longer than it should have. A rest stop lot doesn't go on forever, but this one did. After maybe a minute of creeping forward, I passed another blue sedan, Same make, same license frame, same coffee cup in the holder. It took a second to register that it was the exact same car I'd seen before. I looked to my right, same picnic table, same bench, same jacket. I circled back somehow without turning. That was when the radio started again. All of them, every car at once. The voices overlapped until it became a wall of noise. Sermons, laughter, country tunes, weather reports. My windshield fogged thick and something brushed the outside of the glass. A handprint bloomed there, small, maybe a woman's. Then another beside it. Then 3 more on the passenger side. I floored the gas, headlights slicing through nothing. The speedometer climbed, but the view didn't change. No road signs, no exit ramp, just fog and faint lights glimmering like reflections of themselves. Then my radio came alive, whispering through static. It wasn't a station anymore. It was my own voice. It said my name twice, then the sound of the blinker ticking, then breathing. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded, came to a stop. The fog began to thin, retreating like tidewater. The orange lamps reappeared. The parked cars stood just as they were, doors open, radios quiet. The world looked normal again. I didn't waste a second. I drove straight onto the highway, eyes locked on the yellow lines, refusing to look in the mirror. 20 miles later, I finally pulled over at a truck stop, crowded with semis and lights in life. I sat there shaking, engine idling until dawn started bleeding over the horizon. When I checked my phone, I saw something that froze me. The call log showed an outgoing call made at 3:12 a.m. to my own number. Duration: 1 minute, 12 seconds. I've passed that stretch since then. Rest stop 27A is still listed on the signs, but there's nothing there now. Just gravel and a chain link fence, the state sign reading, closed for renovation. Sometimes, though on nights when the fog rolls in from the hills, drivers say they can still see the glow of lamplight through the trees. A few even pull in, thinking it's still open. They never stay long. The ones who talk about it later always mention the same thing. Radios turning on by themselves, softly playing a woman's voice singing about coming home. I was driving south on Highway 385 just past Fort Stockton when I first saw it. A dust-covered sedan, tan beneath the layers of desert grime, drifting in the lane ahead of me like a ghost through the sand-blasted dark. It had no plates, no visible brake lights, and it moved at an oddly steady pace, 55 miles per hour, no matter how the road twisted or dipped. The desert was empty that night, the kind of emptiness that feels like it's waiting. I remember checking the clock, 3:07 a.m. I thought it was just another local cutting through the night. But the more I followed, the stranger it seemed. Every time I drew closer, my headlights would reflect back dull and distorted, like the windows weren't glass at all but dust-caked mirrors. The rear windshield looked so thick with dirt it was opaque. I couldn't see a driver, not even the faint silhouette of one. When I tried to pass, something in my chest clenched, an instinctive resistance like I shouldn't. The road was long and straight, nothing but scrub, barbed wire, and miles of dark horizon. As I finally pulled alongside, I glanced over. The driver's seat was empty. Not vacant in the nobody there sense, but like there had never been anyone to begin with. The seat was missing. Just a hollow space and an old steering wheel that trembled slightly as if guided by the wind. I gunned my truck, heart pounding, and got past it. My rearview mirror showed nothing. The sedan was gone. I told myself I'd imagined it. Long hours, late night, open desert. Your mind starts making shadows into things. But 2 nights later, on the same stretch of highway, I saw it again. Same shape, same pace, same dull brown dust clinging to every curve. This time it appeared ahead of me out of nowhere, headlights dim as dying lanterns. I slowed down, half expecting to find it abandoned in the middle of the road. But when I came close enough, its tires began to move again, leaving faint tracks in the sand that trailed off the asphalt and faded within seconds like wind erasing footprints. I work oilfield maintenance. Driving at night is part of the job, and so is staying sane in the silence. But after that week, I started taking the long way, an extra 40 minutes through Alpine just to avoid that section of 385. My buddy Carl laughed when I told him. He'd grown up near Marathon, said locals whispered about the dust car for decades. Happens between 2:50 and 3:10 most nights, he said. My dad saw it once. Said the road smelled like hot metal after. I thought he was pulling my leg until the night he offered to ride with me. It was early March, wind pushing fine sand across the road like smoke. At 2:58, Carl started getting quiet. At 3:02, the temperature in the cab dropped, and my headlights picked up a moving shape ahead. The sedan appeared again, same one, no doubt. Thick layers of dust like it had sat in the desert for 50 years. The shape looked too soft around the edges, not solid enough, like it wasn't fully part of the world. Carl's joking stopped. He leaned forward, squinting. "That's it," he whispered. "Don't pass it. Just don't." I didn't plan to, but the thing slowed, almost inviting us closer. Then in the reflection of its side window, I saw something move. Not a person. More like a shifting of the dust itself, pressing from inside the glass, forming the faint impression of a face. Nose, mouth, eyes. But blurred and sliding as if it couldn't hold together. The air smelled like burned rubber and rain on hot tar. We both watched as the sedan drifted right, off the asphalt and onto the shoulder. But there was no sound of gravel, no rise of dust. It just glided. When we passed the spot moments later, the road was bare. No car, no tire marks, not even disturbed sand. I stopped the truck, turned off the engine. The desert was silent except for the hum of wind through the mesquite. My headlights shone over the shoulder where the sedan had gone, revealing nothing. Then Carl pointed. 10 yards ahead there were fresh tire tracks, 2 perfect lines pressed into the dust. They ended abruptly, mid-pattern, like the car had vanished mid-roll. I knelt down, touched the imprint. The ground was warm, too warm. Carl backed away, muttering a prayer. That night changed him. He quit 2 weeks later, moved to Houston. Wouldn't answer my calls. Said he couldn't sleep without hearing the sound of tires on gravel, coming from nowhere. I didn't blame him. I tried to put it behind me, but every few months I'd hear someone mention that same stretch. A state trooper who said his dash cam flickered out around 3 a.m. A rancher who swore he found tire tracks cutting through his property that began in the middle of nowhere. Last month I took that road again, not because I wanted to, but because detours had closed my usual route. Midnight stretched into 2, then almost 3. I caught myself glancing at the clock, 2:59, and my palms started to sweat. The desert around me was quiet, the sky dim with stars, the highway endless and black. Then the horizon flickered and my headlights picked up a shape ahead, the dust-covered sedan. It was slower this time. I could see more detail. The cracks in the paint, the faded logo on the trunk, the outline of something slumped in the back seat. I wanted to look away, but curiosity overruled fear. I edged closer, leaned forward to see through the grime. A handprint marked the inside of the back window. It wasn't recent. The edges were soft, filled with dust, but it looked like someone had pressed it from within while the car was already buried in sand. My truck engine sputtered, lights dimming. The radio turned to static, a low hum that grew louder the closer I got. The sedan's brake lights flashed once, dim, almost colorless, and then it veered gently into the desert. I followed its path for maybe 100 feet before I realized what I was doing. When I stopped, the sedan was gone again. No sign it had ever been there. But the ground around me looked wrong. The sand was packed, not loose, with faint tire impressions crossing over one another. Dozens of them, like countless cars, had passed through that same point over the years. When I knelt to touch the tracks, the warmth pulsed again, a vibration, faint but steady, as if something deep beneath the desert was still turning its wheels. I felt it through my fingertips, slow, rhythmic, mechanical. Then I heard a distant engine idling, though no light showed anywhere, just the sound echoing faintly through the open dark. I got back in the truck and floored it north until the sound faded. My dashboard clock read 3:11 when the lights steadied and the engine calmed. I didn't sleep that day. I sat in my driveway staring at the dirt coating the wheel wells, wondering if I'd picked up any of it from where the sedan vanished. I washed the truck twice before sunrise. Still, when the sun hit just right, I could see streaks of reddish dust clinging to the edges like fingerprints that wouldn't come off. A few days later, I drove by the ranger station near Fort Stockton and asked an older officer if he'd heard stories about that section of 385. He hesitated before answering. Back in '78, he said, a family disappeared out there. Found their car half buried in sand weeks later. Doors open, no bodies. Folks said it looked like the wind had driven it there. No tracks leading in or out. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. I could tell he believed it. Now, whenever I drive that route, I check the clock constantly. If it's anywhere near 3 a.m., I pull over at a gas station or find somewhere to wait. Because sometimes just before dawn, you can still see faint tire marks shimmer across the asphalt, only to vanish when the sun rises. And if you're unlucky enough to follow them, You might find yourself behind that same dust-covered sedan, rolling endlessly down a road that never remembers you were there. The first time I heard it, I was somewhere between Sanderson and Del Rio, running a late load of diesel filters. It was a quiet night, the kind that makes you aware of every hum and click inside your rig. Route 90 at that hour stretches out like a dark river, flat and endless, cutting through scrubland and sleeping towns. I had the CB tuned to channel 19 as usual, trading small talk with a few other drivers scattered across the desert. Then around 2:14 a.m., the chatter went silent all at once. A thin whine came through like feedback from an old radio, and then a voice, clear, calm, almost too calm, said, "Breaker 19, anyone copy? We've got a rollover east of Marfa. Need assistance. Driver unresponsive." I reached for the mic out of habit and said, "Copy that. What's your location exactly?" No answer, just a faint hiss, then static. I figured maybe someone's signal was weak or bouncing off the hills weirdly, so I asked again. Still nothing. After about 30 seconds, another driver broke in, said he'd heard the same call a few nights earlier. Same words, same time, same stretch of road. Then he laughed it off and said, "You'll get used to that out here. Route 90 plays tricks on your ears." But it didn't sound like a trick. The voice had a clarity that didn't match the usual skip you get from long-distance bleed. It sounded close, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat with a handheld radio. I switched through the channels, nothing. Went back to 19, dead air. Then at 2:18, the same voice repeated the call. Exact words, same tone. "Breaker 19, anyone copy? We've got a rollover east of Marfa. Need assistance. Driver unresponsive." The next day at a gas station in Alpine, I mentioned it to an older driver fueling up beside me. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "You heard Route 90's Ghost Channel. They call it the Deadline. Comes alive after 2. Plays old wreck calls that never got answered." He laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from disbelief. It was the kind that covers discomfort. I brushed it off, but it stuck with me. A week later, I was back on that same stretch hauling a load to El Paso. I decided to test it. I parked at a rest pull a few miles east of Marathon. Engine idling, cab lights off, just me in the dark. At 2:05, I turned on the CB, tuned to channel 19, and waited. The wind outside was low and constant, brushing across the desert brush like soft waves. Then right on time, the static shifted. The sound deepened, as if someone had turned up the bass on a signal that wasn't supposed to exist. "Breaker 19, anyone copy?" The same voice. Male, calm, mid-40s maybe. I felt my pulse climb. "We've got a rollover east of Marfa. Need assistance. Driver unresponsive." Then beneath it, barely audible, I thought I heard something else, breathing. I keyed the mic and said, "This is Unit 47, I copy. What's your 20? The voice paused. A full 5 seconds of silence. Then, "Unit 47, you're late." The tone had changed slightly, more mechanical now, like it was filtering through an old tape deck. I froze, not sure if someone was pranking me. I tried to speak again, but the mic hissed back with distortion so loud it made me flinch. When it cleared, the voice continued, softer this time. "We needed you sooner. He's still out here." That was enough for me. I shut the CB off, checked my mirrors, and rolled back onto the highway. For the next 20 miles, my headlights caught nothing but sagebrush and the occasional mile marker. I told myself it had to be interference, maybe old emergency calls bouncing from towers. Something rational. But then I passed the wreck. It was on the north side of the road, just beyond a bend that didn't exist on any map. A jackknife semi, trailer twisted sideways, its cab burned down to the frame. The reflective paint was long gone, but the chrome still caught a flash of my high beams. I slowed, pulled onto the shoulder. There were no police, no signs, nothing. Just that skeletal rig, silent and dead. When I got close enough to read the faded numbers on the door, I stopped breathing. 47, that was my unit number. I checked the plates, different state, old design, but my number was there. The cab interior was gone, melted into the ground, but through the driver's window I could see the seat still in place, blackened and cracked. Something about it felt wrong. I backed away and drove off without reporting it. The next morning I called a buddy who'd been driving since the 80s. He went quiet after I described it. Then he told me that stretch used to be known as the 47 wreck. A driver hauling flammable cargo caught fire after a rollover. The CB record said his last transmission came at 2:14 a.m. asking for help east of Marfa. Nobody ever found his body. They said the wreck burned too hot too long. I didn't touch the CB for 2 months after that. When I finally did, I kept it locked to weather and dispatch. But Route 90 has a way of pulling you back in. There's a loneliness to it, especially past midnight, that makes you crave another voice. Last summer around June, I was running late again, crossing near Valentine. The air was thick with dust, radio quiet, and my eyes were starting to blur from fatigue. Without really thinking, I switched back to 19. Static, then the faint hum of overlapping transmissions. It was 207. Breaker 19, anyone copy? We've got a rollover east of Marfa. I didn't answer. Not this time. But another driver did. Yeah, I copy, a man said, cheerful and unaware. You all right out there? The voice came back, same as always. Calm, steady, almost rehearsed. Need assistance. Driver unresponsive. Then the other driver said, Where you at exactly? Silence, then. You're late. I don't know what happened to that man. Never heard his voice again. But about a week later, westbound traffic slowed near the same mile marker. Another wreck. No survivors. They said the CB mic was still in the dead man's hand, keyed down. Now every time I pass that stretch, I keep the radio off. But sometimes even without it, I swear I hear the static bleeding faintly through the speakers, like the system powers itself on just past 2. A whisper in the white noise asking for help from a wreck that never stopped burning. Last month, a mechanic in Del Rio showed me something while he worked on my rig. Said a truck had been towed in from Route 90 after catching fire. The VIN was unreadable, but the only thing that survived intact was a CB unit. He handed it to me, still reeking of melted plastic. There was a label scratched into the back plate. Unit 47. He laughed, said maybe it was mine. I didn't tell him it was impossible. Didn't tell him that mine was still bolted to my dash. But I asked where the wreck happened. He said east of Marfa, around 2 in the morning. Sometimes when I drive through that part of Texas now, I turn the radio off, pull my hat low, and keep my eyes straight ahead. But even then, even with the world dead quiet and the stars so bright they hurt to look at, I still hear it in the hum of the tires, a distant call breaking through static, repeating the same words like a signal that can't die. Breaker 19, anyone copy? We've got a rollover east of Marfa. Need assistance. Driver unresponsive. It was close to midnight when I saw him for the first time, standing near the Sonora exit sign just off I-10, where the asphalt begins to narrow and the truck lights vanish into black hills. I was driving home from a delivery job out near Fort Stockton, dead tired, running on stale gas station coffee and the hum of old country music from the radio. My eyes burned from the miles. I should have ignored him, should have kept driving, but there was something about how still he stood that made me tap the brakes. He wasn't waving his arms or walking or even looking for a ride. He was just standing there in a gray hoodie, his hands deep in the front pocket, head down. No car, no bag, barefoot. I remember that detail like it was burned into me. The dirt around his feet was pale and dry, yet his skin looked clean, almost like he'd just stepped out of a house instead of wandering a highway shoulder. When I pulled over and rolled the window down, the boy looked up. He couldn't have been more than 17. Pale face, hollow eyes that didn't catch the light right. He smiled a little, like he was shy or embarrassed to ask. His voice was soft, flat. You going east? I told him, yeah, toward Junction. He nodded once. That's where I'm headed. Just to Junction. He climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation, like he'd done it 100 times before. The smell hit me first. A faint, wet earth scent like rain-soaked dirt after a storm, except there hadn't been rain in weeks. He sat quiet, arms folded, eyes fixed on the windshield. For a while, neither of us spoke. The highway stretched empty ahead, and the darkness outside the beams of my headlights felt alive somehow, thick with that Texas night silence that hums in your ears. After a few miles, I asked him where exactly in Junction he was going. He said, just there. His tone didn't invite more questions. I figured maybe he'd had a fight with his folks or got stranded. He didn't look strung out or dangerous, just off. He kept glancing into the side mirror every minute or two, like he was waiting for something to catch up. About 20 minutes in, my radio crackled and went to static. I reached to adjust it, and he said sharply, don't. I froze. He turned his head toward me for the first time since he got in. They don't like when you play that. I didn't know what he meant. I asked, who doesn't like it? He didn't answer. He leaned forward and stared at the windshield again. I told myself it was nerves or maybe a mental issue, something harmless. I kept driving. Then I noticed the mile markers. I'd passed one that said 384 when I picked him up. I should have been nearing 370 by then. But the next one read 384 again. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. 10 minutes later, another 384. The boy whispered, almost to himself, "You shouldn't have stopped." His voice was calm, resigned, like someone pointing out a fact too late to change. My throat tightened. I told him this wasn't funny. He didn't respond. He started humming something under his breath, a low tune like a lullaby, but wrong somehow, the rhythm uneven, dissonant. I realized he was cold. The air in the cab had dropped fast. My breath fogged the windshield slightly, though the AC wasn't on. I looked at the temperature gauge. Normal. I glanced over and noticed water on his hoodie, tiny dark patches spreading along the fabric. It looked wet, but not like rain. More like he'd been standing in a river. I told him I was going to pull over, maybe drop him at the next rest area. He turned his head slowly, eyes black in the dashboard light. "There isn't one." His lips barely moved. I saw something then, his feet. The floor mat under him was damp. I could smell the same muddy odor, stronger now. My pulse started to race. I told myself maybe he'd been walking through a creek bed. But I knew better. I pressed harder on the gas, desperate to reach a sign or a light. I drove for what felt like half an hour, but the road didn't change. The same stretch of cracked asphalt, the same low fences, the same mile marker, 384. The boy said quietly, "You can't get there from here. Nobody does." I shouted at him to get out, but he just shook his head. "You picked me up. You finished the trip." The lights flickered on the dash. My truck coughed once and the engine stalled even though the tank was half full. When the headlights went out, the dark swallowed everything. I sat there breathing hard, my hand trembling on the ignition. The only sound was a soft dripping like water running down metal. I turned to tell him to leave, but the passenger seat was empty. Just a puddle where he'd been. I threw open the door, stumbled onto the shoulder. The air outside was heavy, wet. I looked around and realized I wasn't where I thought I was. The Sonora exit sign stood ahead of me again, just visible in the weak glow of the moon. My truck faced the same direction it had when I first stopped. I climbed back in, started the engine. It turned over easily. The dash clock read 12:03, same as before. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the keys. I didn't stop again that night. I drove straight through to Kerrville, too afraid to look in the mirrors. 2 days later, I told a mechanic buddy in Junction about it. He got real quiet, then said a trucker saw the same kid near that exit last year. Said he stopped too. The guy's rig was found abandoned a week later, 20 miles east, still running. Doors locked from the inside. Cab soaked like it had been through a downpour. The driver was never found. Locals say the boy drowned in the Llano River after a flood 20 years back. They say he was trying to walk home to Junction when the bridge gave out. Every few months, someone new claims to see him. Same hoodie, same bare feet. Always around midnight. Always asking for a ride just to Junction. Now, when I pass that stretch of road, I slow down, but I never stop. Sometimes I still see a figure in the mirror, standing under the green glow of the exit sign, waiting. And every time I swear the smell of wet earth drifts through the cab again, just long enough to make me wonder if he's still walking, still looking for someone foolish enough to take him the rest of the way home. It was about 2 in the morning when I first saw it. The road out past Sonora was empty that night, not a single pair of headlights in either direction for miles. I'd been driving west toward a property my uncle left behind, a busted-up ranch I'd promised to check on after a storm tore through the area. The air smelled like mesquite and dust, and the sky had that pale, washed-out glow you get when the moon hides behind thin clouds. The radio had long given up pulling in any station, so the only sounds inside the truck were the hum of the tires and the occasional rattle from the toolbox in the back. I wasn't tired, not exactly, but I felt that odd kind of stillness that comes from being the only moving thing in 100 miles. About 15 minutes past the last cattle gate, something darted across the beams of my headlights. I thought it was a jackrabbit at first, just a blur of tan and shadow, but it was too big. It moved with the speed and jump of one, sure, but the shape wasn't right. Its back was too high off the ground, its limbs long and crooked, and the way it turned its head toward me as it ran made my stomach tighten. I slowed a little, eyes narrowing at the glass, but by the time I focused, the thing had vanished into the brush. The mesquite trees swayed slightly, then everything went still again. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a coyote mid-stride or a deer's reflection caught weird in the light. The brain invents things out here. Especially when the world around you is so quiet it feels like you've stepped outside of time. I sped back up to 60 and tried to shake the unease crawling up the back of my neck. But a few minutes later, something appeared in my side mirror, movement keeping pace with the truck. It was running beside me, not in the brush but on the gravel shoulder. Its shape flickered in and out of the shadow line cast by my headlights, but every few seconds I could see it clearly enough to know it wasn't an animal I'd ever seen. It ran on all fours, yes, but not like anything natural. The limbs were jointed wrong, the elbows or knees bending in ways that looked backward. The head stayed low, and every time it swung toward me, the eyes caught the light in a dead, flat white instead of the usual yellow you'd expect from an animal's night shine. I don't remember breathing for the first mile it followed me. I eased off the accelerator, thinking maybe I was imagining its pace, that it would fall back if I slowed. It didn't. Every time my tires rolled slower, it matched me exactly. The sound of its movement started to bleed through the hum of the road, a scraping rhythm that sounded like claws or bare bone against rock. Then as I passed a faded mile marker, it let out a sound. Not a growl or a cry. It was something closer to a laugh, short and dry, carried through the air like breath through teeth. I pressed the pedal down and the truck roared. 70, 75, 80. The creature, or whatever it was, kept up. Its body moved with horrifying coordination. Each stride longer, the arms pulling it forward like an ape sprinting, but faster, too fast. The moonlight hit it once when the clouds broke, and I saw the outline more clearly than I wanted. It was shaped almost like a man, but stretched, lean, and wrong. The fur wasn't fur at all, but something like dust or fine sand clinging to skin. And as I watched, it turned its head fully toward me without breaking stride. The face was long, the mouth wide, but what froze me was that it smiled. A thin, deliberate human smile. For 7 miles it stayed there, sometimes vanishing into shadow, only to reappear a few feet from my door again. I could hear my heart over the engine, could feel sweat sliding down my ribs despite the cold air blasting from the vents. I tried flashing the high beams, hitting the horn, even veering slightly toward it once out of desperate stupidity, but it didn't react. It was like it was studying me, waiting for something. When I hit the bend where the old windmill used to stand, it peeled off without warning, darting across the ditch into the open pasture. I saw the grass part as it ran, but it never once slowed or looked back. The movement just faded into the distance until all I saw was flat darkness again. I didn't stop until I reached the ranch house. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key into the lock. The house itself was just as I'd left it months before. Dust on everything, faint smell of mildew, a window rattling softly in the wind. I turned on the porch light and walked to the edge of the yard, trying to convince myself I'd been overtired, hallucinating maybe. That's when I noticed the prints. They were in the dirt beside the truck, clear as day under the yellow light. Long, narrow impressions that started at the end of the drive and went back toward the road. Not paw prints. Each looked more like a handprint pressed deep into the soil, 4 long fingers and a thumb dragging slightly behind. The distance between them was too far apart for a man to make running on all fours. I counted maybe 30 before they vanished into the darker soil beyond the fence. Inside, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house set me on edge. Around 3:30, I finally sat by the window with a flashlight and scanned the fields. Nothing, just the steady whisper of the wind through dry grass. But then faintly I saw movement out by the windmill. Something low crawling along the base of the hill, headed in slow, uneven bursts toward the fence. I killed the light immediately and stayed crouched there until dawn. When I went outside that morning, the field looked untouched. No tracks, no flattened grass, no sign anything had ever been there. I convinced myself again that I'd imagined it, that the desert plays tricks at night. But when I got back in the truck, I noticed something on the passenger side door. Thin streaks of dust, like someone had run a hand along it from front to back. 5 perfect lines, each ending in a faint smudge that could have been a fingertip. I drove back to town that afternoon, faster than I should have, and didn't look in the mirrors once. The highway shimmered in the heat, and the land stretched out endless on both sides. I kept telling myself I'd forget it, that it was just nerves and darkness and the mind's tendency to build monsters out of shadows. But every time I pass that stretch near Sonora, I find myself watching the shoulder. waiting for movement. They say jackrabbits are lucky in some old ranch stories, that seeing one at night means rain or good fortune. I don't think whoever made up that saying ever met the one that followed my car, because sometimes when I drive those roads late, I still hear that dry laugh in the wind, and it always sounds like it's keeping pace. It was around 2 a.m. when I saw the place. I'd been driving west out of Abilene for hours, chasing a headlight tunnel through nothing but scrub and darkness. The GPS had lost signal somewhere near Merkel, and the last sign I remembered seeing said, Snyder 48 miles. I wasn't even sure I was still headed that way. My eyelids felt like they were coated in sand, and when the yellow glow of a motel appeared up ahead, just a single-story stretch of faded doors and a gravel lot, I felt an immediate rush of relief. It didn't have a name on the building, no neon vacancy sign, nothing. Just light spilling from the office window and a rusted soda machine humming beside the door. I parked my truck near the middle of the lot. The gravel looked freshly spread, pale under the lights. When I killed the engine, the silence hit, thick, the kind that makes your ears ring. I sat there a moment, noticing how the air didn't move, not even a breeze. Then I got out and headed toward the office. Inside, a woman was sitting behind the counter, her skin pale under the fluorescent light. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes lifted to me slowly, and when she spoke, her voice sounded distant, like she was talking through a radio. "One night?" she asked. I nodded and handed her cash. She didn't ask for ID. Just slid a key across the counter with a metal tag stamped 7. The numbers were worn down, but I could still read them. "Breakfast starts at 6, she said, though I didn't see any breakfast area, only a dim hallway stretching behind her. When I asked if there was Wi-Fi, she smiled faintly. "You won't need that out here." My room was the second door on the left. The lock was stiff, and when I finally got it open, the smell of stale air and disinfectant rolled out. The light switch buzzed before flickering on. The place was clean but old. Floral curtains, wood paneling, a sagging bed with a quilt that looked hand-stitched decades ago. I tossed my bag down and sat on the edge of the mattress. For a few seconds, I just listened. I could hear the faint hum of the vending machine outside, and underneath it, something else. A soft rhythmic sound, like a slow tapping against the wall behind the bed. I assumed it was plumbing and ignored it. I showered quick, dried off with a towel that smelled faintly of bleach, and turned on the TV. It only got one channel, some local broadcast playing a weather loop. The voiceover mentioned thunderstorms, east of Sweetwater, though I hadn't seen a single cloud. After a while, the sound faded to static. I left it running low for background noise and climbed into bed. At some point during the night, I woke up to the sound of a car door closing, then another. I checked the clock, 3:23. The air felt different, colder, and I realized the heater had shut off. I pulled the curtain back and looked outside. The lot was empty except for my truck. The lights along the roofline were still on, but they looked dimmer, like fog had rolled in, though the air outside looked clear. I stood there for a minute, listening again. No voices, no engines, just that same soft tapping now coming from somewhere under the floor. I lay back down, pulling the quilt up higher. Sleep came in thin slices after that, dreams of headlights cutting across endless gravel, of doors that opened to nothing but black wind. When I finally woke for good, sunlight was slipping through the curtains. For a second, I felt disoriented, like I'd overslept on some long road trip. Then I remembered the motel. I packed up and stepped outside, squinting into the daylight. But what hit me first wasn't the brightness, it was the silence, the kind of deep quiet that presses against your skull. The air smelled different too, sharper like wet stone. I looked toward the office. The window was gone. So was the door. Just bare siding, weathered gray. I turned in a slow circle. The whole row of rooms was gone. Not collapsed. Gone. Nothing but a wide stretch of gravel and my truck sitting dead center, dusted lightly like it hadn't been moved in weeks. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it. The key was still in my pocket, cold and heavy. I walked to where the office should have been, kicking at the gravel. Beneath the surface, I found a piece of concrete with the outline of where a foundation used to be. The edges were soft with age, as if it had been that way for years. Beyond that was nothing but mesquite and dirt road leading back to the highway. I drove east for a while, trying to retrace my path. About 20 miles later, I found a gas station and pulled in. The clerk looked up as I entered, an older man with a gray beard and oil stains on his shirt. I asked if there was a motel nearby, maybe one without a sign, somewhere along the stretch I'd come from. He shook his head. "Ain't been anything out that way in decades," he said. "You sure you weren't on 180? There used to be an old roadside place out there, burned down back in the 90s. My stomach tightened. I asked what it was called, and he thought for a second before shrugging. Something with pines in the name, maybe Twin Pines or Lone Pine. Never had much of a sign. Folks said the owner used to paint one but never finished. After the fire, they cleared it all. You wouldn't find a splinter left now." I thanked him and left, feeling that kind of unease that settles deep in your chest. I drove back toward Abilene just to check, scanning both sides of the road. I must have driven that same stretch 3 times, but all I ever saw was empty land and scrub. No turnoff, no gravel, nothing. When I stopped and got out, the wind carried the smell of ash. That night, when I unpacked my bag at home, I found the key again. The tag was still stamped 7, but the metal had turned darker, tarnished like it had been buried for years. I tried looking up the address printed faintly on the back, just a county road number, but it didn't exist anymore. Google Maps showed a blank spot, no structures, no driveways, just brushland. Sometimes when I drive west at night, I keep my eyes on the shoulder, half expecting to see those same yellow lights again. Once or twice I thought I did. A faint glow between the trees, gone when I got closer. I told myself it was just another truck stop, maybe a porch light from a ranch house. But every now and then, when I pass that stretch of highway, my radio cuts out, replaced by the soft hum of static, the same tone that played in that room. And beneath it, faint and rhythmic, I swear I can still hear that tapping. The radio was my only company through that stretch of West Texas, a slow, crackling voice reading from the Book of Job on AM 740. The signal would fade every few miles, swallowed by static, then return with a new passage as if it had been waiting for me. I was somewhere between Fort Stockton and Coyanosa, that long, lonely corridor of Pecos County where the land flattens into a gray, endless ocean. It was past midnight, and I'd been driving since El Paso, the kind of drive that makes you forget how many hours you've been in motion. The dashboard clock flickered 12:42, though I couldn't remember when I'd last checked it. The heater hummed, and the headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the sand haze drifting across the road. I hadn't planned on driving at night, not after everything that happened with Daniel, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice saying my name the way he did the night before the crash. Soft, distracted, halfway between a sigh and a plea. I twisted the radio dial, looking for music, but the only thing that came through clearly was AM 740, some kind of traveling sermon station out of Midland. The preacher's voice was hoarse and slow, the kind of man who believed his words were being carried by angels. I left it on just for the comfort of human speech. For a while, the night was nothing but the sound of tires, the desert wind, and his droning rhythm. Then the static started to pulse, sharp and rhythmic, as though something were breathing beneath it. I turned the volume down, thinking it was interference from the power lines that ran parallel to the highway. But when the voice came back, it wasn't the preacher. It was Daniel. At first, I thought it was my brain playing tricks. The words were muffled, stretched under layers of static, but the tone, the cadence, it was him. I turned the volume up slowly, my hand shaking. "Lydia," the voice said, clear and broken, "you shouldn't be out here." The air left my lungs. The preacher came back mid-sentence, talking about repentance and wandering souls, but Daniel's voice bled through again, layered over his, like 2 stations crossing in the same signal. "Pull over," he said. "Please, Lyd, just stop the car." I gripped the wheel tighter and glanced into the rearview mirror. The highway was empty behind me, just my taillights fading into black. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the sermon was replaying some old call-in broadcast. Maybe my tired brain was hearing what it wanted to, but then the preacher stopped speaking altogether and Daniel's voice filled the car. "You're near the mile marker where it happened," he said. "You need to listen to me now. I nearly slammed on the brakes. My heart started to pound so violently it drowned out the sound of the wind. Daniel had died less than 3 months ago on this same stretch of highway, when his truck went off the road during a sandstorm. They found him 2 days later, his radio still tuned to AM 740, the ignition key still in the on position. The trooper who called me said he must have been trying to drive through the dust when the road disappeared under him. I'd spent weeks telling myself it was just bad luck, that he couldn't have known. But hearing his voice now on the same frequency, the same road, felt like something deliberate. I pulled onto the shoulder, letting the car idle. The wind scraped against the windows like dry fingers. The radio hissed and popped, then went silent. I waited, staring out into the desert where the faint shapes of mesquite bushes leaned under the moonlight. Then the static returned, softer this time, almost gentle. "Lydia," the voice whispered again. "I tried to find you. I wanted to turn it off, but something in me couldn't." My eyes filled with tears before I even realized it. "Daniel?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. The speaker crackled in response. "You shouldn't stop here," he said. "There's something in the sand." The headlights flickered just for a second. When they steadied again, I thought I saw movement. A shape, low and slow, crossing the road about 30 yards ahead. It wasn't a person, not quite. More like a shadow with substance dragging itself across the asphalt. The radio pulsed with static again, and Daniel's voice grew desperate. "Drive," he said. "Don't look at it, just go." I put the car in drive, but before I could press the accelerator, the engine sputtered and died. The headlights dimmed to nothing, and the world folded into a silence so deep I could hear my heartbeat. I tried the ignition again, but the engine only coughed. Then the radio came alive, louder than before, Daniel's voice almost shouting. "It's in the road, Lydia. Don't open the door." I looked up. The thing was closer now. Even in the faint silver of the moonlight, I could see its surface moving, like sand being pushed around by invisible hands. The outline was vaguely human, but wrong in the joints, like it had been assembled from memory. It stopped in front of the car and lifted its head, though there was nothing there but a hollow, shifting face made of dust. My breath caught as a faint knocking sound came from the rear window, slow and deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. Daniel's voice filled the car again, calmer now. "It followed me that night," he said. "I thought I could drive away from it, but the signal brought it closer. It uses the voices. It uses us." I couldn't move. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my pulse racing. The knocking at the back window grew louder, faster. Then the voice on the radio wasn't Daniel's anymore, it was mine. "Lydia," it said in my exact tone, the same frightened tremor. "Let me in." That broke me. I screamed and twisted the key again. The engine roared to life as if nothing had ever been wrong. The headlights came on, blinding the shape in front of me, scattering it like smoke. I slammed my foot on the gas and the car lurched forward. The radio erupted with static, then silence. I didn't look back until I reached the Pecos city limits, where the glow of distant sodium lights finally broke the darkness. When I pulled into a diner lot and turned off the ignition, the radio clicked softly even though I hadn't touched it. A single whisper leaked through the speaker, just one word, "Safe." Then it went dead. I sat there until the sun began to tint the sky, shaking so hard I couldn't even drink the coffee I'd bought. When I finally worked up the nerve to check the frequency again, AM 740 was gone. Just static. The waitress said there hadn't been a sermon station on that band for years, not since some transmitter fire near Fort Stockton back in 2002. A week later, I drove back to El Paso by daylight, forcing myself to take the same road. At mile marker 223, I saw a small cross by the shoulder, half buried in sand. Daniel's name had been carved into it, the letters almost worn away. Someone, maybe a trooper, maybe a stranger, had tied an old radio antenna to it, the metal rusted and bent. As I passed it, the radio in my car hissed once faintly, just long enough for me to hear him whisper my name again. Then the static stopped. I haven't turned that dial since. It started as a rumor shared by truckers who passed through Balmorhea after midnight, the kind of story that rolls across diner counters with the smell of burned coffee and diesel smoke. They called it the greenhouse light, a soft green glow that hung behind a chain-link fence a mile south of town, near an abandoned agricultural lot. Most drivers brushed it off as a grow lamp left on by a farmer or some local prank, but the ones who stopped claimed their engines died the moment they pulled over. their headlights dimming like breath on a mirror. I didn't believe any of it, not until I saw it myself. I'd been working night shifts at a shipping yard in Fort Stockton and drove back home through Balmorhea 3 times a week, taking the long rural route along the state road that wound through desert scrub and oil fields. The drive was lonely but peaceful. I'd keep the radio low, windows cracked just enough to let in the dry scent of creosote and dust. Around late September, I started hearing chatter on the CB. Truckers saying there was a glow near the old greenhouse property, the one shut down after a chemical fire back in the 90s. They said you could see it through the fence around mile marker 78. One driver swore his rig stalled right in front of it and wouldn't start again until sunrise. Another said his dog wouldn't stop whining and trying to claw its way out of the cab. It got under my skin. I wasn't a superstitious man, but those stories had a rhythm of truth to them. The kind of detail people don't make up. The sound of a ticking engine cooling in the dark, the smell of melted rubber, the silence that follows when everything electrical dies at once. So one night, curiosity won. I left Fort Stockton at 1 in the morning, telling myself I'd just take a slow drive past that mile marker and see what all the fuss was about. The highway was empty. The kind of empty that makes your headlights look too small. The land around Balmorhea is flat and wide, broken only by the silhouettes of utility poles and the occasional mesquite tree. About 5 miles out, I saw the fence, a tall, rusted chain-link barrier running along the edge of a dirt access road. Beyond it lay a field of overgrown weeds and the collapsed frame of what must have once been the greenhouse, its metal ribs catching bits of starlight. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint at first, like a reflection off glass. But as I slowed down, it grew clearer, blooming into a pale green haze pulsing behind the greenhouse's skeletal remains. It wasn't the steady light of electricity. It shimmered like the surface of a pond disturbed by a breeze. My hands tightened on the wheel and something in my gut whispered to keep driving. But I didn't. I pulled over. The moment I shifted into park, the dashboard lights flickered and went out. The radio hissed into silence. Even the headlights dimmed until they barely pushed through the dust. The only sound was the clicking of the cooling engine. I sat there frozen, every hair on my arm standing straight. My phone's flashlight refused to turn on. When I tried the ignition again, the key turned freely, but nothing caught. No click, no hum. Dead. The glow pulsed brighter. It moved. Not like something swinging or burning, but like it was alive. Slow waves of green light rippled outward from the center of the collapsed structure. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, and that's when I realized there was something standing just inside the fence line. A shape darker than the night itself, tall and narrow, almost human but not quite. It was facing the light, not me, as if worshipping it. Its head tilted back in unnatural jerks like it was catching breaths it didn't need. I felt my throat tighten. I couldn't look away. The light seemed to pull at me, drawing me toward it. Against every instinct, I opened the door. The desert air hit me, cool and metallic. I stepped out, boots crunching gravel, and immediately noticed how silent everything was. No insects, no wind, no hum from the nearby power lines. Just that soft green pulse. The figure turned. Slowly, as if it had been waiting. It didn't have a face, not one I could make out, but there were indentations where eyes should have been. They caught the glow, reflecting it like dull glass. I tried to speak, to say something stupid like hello, but the words stuck to my tongue. The figure moved closer, its body rippling as if underwater. Each step it took made the light grow brighter, humming faintly now, a low tone that buzzed inside my teeth. I stumbled backward toward my truck. The key was still in the ignition. I slammed the door, twisted it, and nothing happened. Then the glow flashed, one blinding pulse, and the figure vanished. Everything went dark again, even the stars. It was as if someone had pulled a black curtain over the sky. I sat there in total darkness, heart pounding so loud I could hear the blood in my ears. Then, just as sudden, the engine roared back to life on its own. Headlights flared. The radio burst with static so loud it made me jump. I floored it, gravel spitting under the tires, and didn't stop until I hit the next gas station 20 miles east. The clerk stared at me when I came in, said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't hold the coffee cup steady. When I told him where I'd stopped, his face went pale. He said the greenhouse lot had been fenced off after a fertilizer explosion killed 3 workers in 1988. The company left in a hurry, never cleaned up the chemicals. Locals said they still glowed some nights when the humidity was high, but then he lowered his voice and added something else. They found one of the workers out there months later, he said, or what was left of him. His body was all dried up, skin stuck to the bones like he'd been mummified. Thing is, the coroner said it hadn't been long, like he'd died just the night before they found him, but that was months after the fire. I didn't sleep that day. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that green shimmer pulsing through the dark, and the shape standing beneath it. The next night I took the long way home, an extra 30 miles through the interstate, just to avoid that stretch of road. But it didn't help. The dream started about a week later, always the same. I'm driving down that road again. The glow appears in the distance, and no matter how hard I press the gas, I can't pass it. My engine sputters, my lights fade, and I hear a whisper through the static of the radio. My own voice calling my name from inside the greenhouse. Sometimes I wake up to the faint smell of burnt metal in my room. Once my truck refused to start for no reason, even in broad daylight. When I lifted the hood, the battery cables were coated in a thin layer of green dust, soft as powder. I cleaned, then replaced the battery, but the truck never ran right again. I haven't gone near Balmorhea since, but people still talk about that light. A couple of months ago, a state trooper claimed his cruiser died out there, said his radio picked up a woman's voice repeating a single phrase, "We're still working." When he got the car started again, there was a handprint on the inside of the windshield, smeared with something phosphorescent. Every time I hear another story, I feel that same chill crawl up my spine. Because whatever that light is, it isn't chemical, and it isn't man-made. It's waiting for whoever's foolish enough to stop and stare long enough for it to notice. And once it notices, it doesn't forget. I still drive nights, but if I ever see that faint green shimmer through the dark again, I'll keep my eyes straight ahead and my foot pressed down hard. Because there's something behind that fence that wants to be seen, and when you look too long, you start glowing too. It was around 10 at night when I first saw the church bus. Highway 67 runs long and empty through that stretch of land between Mertzon and San Angelo, where the air smells of dust and cedar, and the sky feels wider than anywhere else in Texas. I was heading home from a job in Odessa, half asleep behind the wheel of my old F-150, with nothing but static humming through the radio. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the dark and the faint red glow of my dash. Then out of nowhere, the rearview mirror caught a flash of something white behind me, bright for a moment, then gone. I thought it was just another truck, maybe some ranch hand in a hurry, until it appeared again, closer this time. The headlights were wrong, too high and too far apart. I leaned forward, squinting, and saw that it wasn't a truck at all. It was an old church bus, the kind you'd see parked outside rural chapels on Sunday mornings, painted white with the name of some Baptist congregation fading on the side. This one had no name, no markings at all, just chipped white paint and a grill that looked like teeth under my taillights. It was gaining fast. I checked my speed, 65 steady, and before I could blink, the thing was on me. I moved over, half expecting it to slow down or pass, but it didn't hesitate. It shot past like it weighed nothing, the entire body of the bus shuddering as it went by. I caught a clear look through its side windows, and that was when my stomach turned. Every seat was filled. I mean full, packed tight with people. But they weren't moving. They were sitting perfectly straight, all facing forward, their heads tilted slightly up like they were looking at the ceiling. The interior lights glowed faintly yellow, enough for me to see the faces. Each one was pale, and each mouth hung open in a wide, unnatural smile. Not like laughter or joy, but like something pulled their lips back and forgot to let go. As it passed, the driver turned to look at me. I swear he did. His face was gray, eyes hollow, the same grin stretching across his cheeks. He didn't even have his hands on the wheel. The bus roared ahead, the tail lights flickering a dull red, and in seconds it vanished into the darkness. My hands were slick on the steering wheel. I pulled over at the next shoulder, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The air outside was still quiet, just the hiss of the wind brushing the dry grass. I sat there for a while, staring down the empty road, trying to convince myself I hadn't dozed off and imagined the whole thing. But the smell lingered, a faint, burnt scent like rubber and something older, sweeter. I finally drove home, keeping my eyes fixed on the mirrors the entire way. The next morning, I couldn't shake it. Every time I thought about that bus, I saw those faces again. I tried to tell a guy at work, this old mechanic named Rudy, and he just laughed. Said there used to be a story about a church bus that crashed out on that stretch back in the 70s. He didn't know the details, just that it went off a bridge after choir practice one night and burned. Nobody made it out. They say the bus was carrying the whole youth group and their pastor. I asked him which church, but he couldn't remember. You know how folks talk, he said. Probably just small-town ghost stuff. Still, it got under my skin. That night I looked it up. There wasn't much online, but I found an old newspaper clipping archived from a San Angelo paper dated 1974. 12 dead in tragic bus crash near Mertzon, the headline read. The photo showed what was left of a bus on its side, blackened and half melted. The story said they'd lost control after a tire blowout and hit a guardrail. The pastor, his wife, and 10 church members all deceased. The name of the church was Faith Hill Baptist. I thought that would put it to rest, but something about the photo bothered me. The bus was white, yes, but there was no visible name on the side. The article said the heat had stripped the paint clean. A week later, driving the same route home, I saw it again. Same time of night, same stretch of highway. Only this time I was ready. I slowed down and waited. Sure enough, the glow of headlights appeared behind me. Two bright circles cutting through the dark. They came fast, faster than anything that size should move. I could feel the hum in my steering wheel before I even saw the shape. It pulled up behind me, then veered left to pass. My heart was hammering, but I forced myself to look. The same cracked paint, the same rows of passengers staring ahead with those horrible smiles. But now some of them were turned toward me, their necks craned unnaturally. Faces pressed against the glass, teeth showing, mouths open as if they were screaming silently. The driver's eyes caught mine again, and I swear they were glowing faintly green under the cabin light. He grinned wider, and as the bus passed, the radio in my truck crackled to life. Nothing but static and faint voices, overlapping like a broken choir. I slammed the radio off, but it kept hissing faintly, even with the power button dead. The bus disappeared again, vanishing into the stretch of blacktop ahead. But the weirdest part wasn't that. A few seconds later, every light on my dash flickered out. The engine sputtered and died as if something drained it. I coasted to the side, trying the ignition, but nothing. Just silence. The smell returned, burnt rubber mixed with something sour like rot. I sat there in the dark, phone flashlight trembling in my hand, until finally, after what felt like forever, the truck started again on the first try. The radio was silent. Everything worked fine. I drove home in near panic, praying to see another set of headlights, any normal car. The next day, I told Rudy again. He looked at me differently that time, less like I was crazy and more like he'd remembered something. He said there's a story the old ranchers tell, that the bus doesn't just appear to anyone. It shows up to those who've done something they regret. People who carry guilt. I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. I hadn't told him why I was driving that route in the first place. My brother had died on that same highway 5 years ago. I wasn't there when it happened, though I should have been. He'd called me that night, said his car broke down near Mertzon and he needed a ride. I ignored the call. I was drunk and angry over something stupid. He got hit by a semi less than an hour later. 2 nights after hearing Rudy's story, I dreamed of the bus. I was sitting in the driver's seat, hands glued to the wheel, and all those faces behind me were singing. It wasn't a melody I knew, just long, drawn-out notes that hurt to hear. When I woke up, my throat was dry, and I could still hear the faint sound of humming like it was coming from outside the house. I looked through the window, half expecting to see headlights in the distance, but the road was dark. For days, I avoided Highway 67, took the long way around through Cristoval even though it added an hour. Then one evening, I got off work late, too tired to care. The direct route was quicker, and I told myself nothing would happen if I didn't think about it. Halfway between Mertzon and the junction, my radio snapped on by itself, flooding the cabin with that same broken static. My fingers went cold on the steering wheel. I reached to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. Then through the static came the faintest sound, a voice thin and crackling like it was far away. "You left him," it said. I froze. "You left him on the road." The voice was familiar. "Hi, brothers." I tried to change the station, to do anything, but the radio stayed locked. "We waited," the voice said again. Then silence. Headlights appeared ahead of me. I realized with a jolt they weren't coming toward me but facing away, like a vehicle had stopped in the middle of the highway. I slowed down, the beam of my lights catching on the white paint of a bus. No engine noise, no movement, just the faint hum of wind through the open windows. I should have turned around right then. Instead, I pulled up beside it. The doors were open. The inside was dark except for one flickering bulb near the back. I don't know what made me do it, but I stepped out. The air smelled heavy, burnt, the same scent I'd noticed before. I climbed the steps, calling out softly. The sound of my voice disappeared inside, swallowed by the space. The seats were all empty this time. Torn, charred, the floor coated in ash. As I moved deeper, the light bulb steadied, casting long shadows down the aisle. Then I saw them. Handprints, black and greasy, smeared along the windows. Not small ones. Dozens, maybe more, all pressed from the inside. A noise came from the back. A shuffle, a breath. I turned and saw the driver sitting upright behind the wheel, though I could have sworn the seat was empty a moment ago. His head turned slowly toward me, that same grin splitting his face. "Plenty of room," he whispered. The lights flared, blinding me. When I opened my eyes again, I was outside, standing in the middle of the road. The bus was gone, just tire marks in the dust and the sound of my truck idling behind me. I drove straight home and never told anyone the full story. But sometimes when the wind's right and the night's too quiet, I swear I can still hear that low hum in the distance like an engine with no driver. A few months later, Rudy didn't show up to work. His wife said he'd taken the highway to visit his sister in Mertzen and never made it. They found his truck a week later, parked neatly on the shoulder. Engine off, doors open. On the rear window, someone had drawn a cross with a finger through the dust. They say there were tire tracks beside it that didn't match his vehicle, wide and deep like from an old bus. On the long stretch between Alpine and Fort Davis, there's a shoulder of road that never feels right, even under daylight. The asphalt ripples where the heat hits it, and the telephone poles lean ever so slightly as if something once pushed them from behind. I drove that road hundreds of times hauling freight from Midland down to Presidio, but it was one Halloween night about 6 years ago when I saw the man with the lantern. The night had that thin desert chill where the air cuts dry against your throat, and the wind carries grit that feels like sandpaper against your cheeks. The radio was fading in and out between static and a talk show about some local ghost legend. I turned it down low and kept my eyes on the narrow beam of headlights ahead. The desert was empty, moonless, only the occasional flicker of a fence post catching light like a flash of bone. Around 10 miles out from Fort Davis, I saw a small orange light swaying along the shoulder. I slowed, thinking it might be a ranch hand walking back from a broken-down truck. The light bobbed steadily, rhythmically, and for a moment I could hear the faint metallic rattle of something swinging. It looked like an old-fashioned lantern, the kind you see in antique stores or those restored mining towns. The figure holding it moved strangely, gliding more than walking, the lantern making smooth arcs back and forth as though it were pendulum swinging in perfect time. When my headlights caught him full on, I gripped the steering wheel hard enough that my knuckles cracked. There was a man-shaped outline, wearing what looked like a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat but no legs below the knees. He wasn't walking. He was floating just above the asphalt, the hem of his coat fluttering as though it were brushing against a wind I couldn't feel. I hit the brakes out of pure reflex, tires chirping on the pavement. The lantern's glow flickered once like it had been disturbed, then steadied again. He didn't turn or react, just kept that same silent forward motion along the shoulder. The road was empty behind me and the desert lay still, so I idled there, watching him move, the amber light drifting farther until it became no more than a dull glimmer swallowed by the dark. I sat there longer than I should have, feeling the hairs rise along my arms until I finally eased back onto the highway. When I reached town, I stopped at a diner to clear my head. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a ponytail and smoker's laugh, noticed how pale I looked. She poured me coffee and asked if I was coming from Alpine. I told her I was, and she nodded like she already knew why I was shaking. "You saw him," she said. "The man with the lantern." I asked what she meant. She leaned against the counter and lowered her voice. Every Halloween somebody does, usually around the same stretch of 118. My brother swore he saw him back in '94. Said the lantern light passed through his hood like smoke. Folks around here think he's the ghost of a surveyor who got caught in a landslide when they were cutting that road back in the '30s. I tried to laugh it off, said maybe it was a trick of light or a prank. She didn't laugh. Don't stop for him, she said. That's what people forget. You can look, but don't you dare stop. When I left the diner, I decided to check into the lodge outside town instead of driving the rest of the night, but sleep wouldn't come. Around midnight, I found myself sitting in the parking lot, smoking and staring at the black outline of the mountains. There was a strange orange glow down the slope of the highway, faint, like the reflection of fire on glass. The next morning, I drove back toward the same spot. I told myself it was to prove I'd imagined it, that it was nothing but headlight refraction or fatigue. But part of me wanted to see if he'd left anything behind. When I reached the curve, the air felt wrong again. Still too still. Even the crows that usually circled the ranches nearby were gone. I pulled over onto the shoulder, shut off the engine, and stepped out. My boots crunched on gravel. There were faint scuff marks across the asphalt as though something heavy had been dragged. A few feet off the road, half buried in the dirt, was a shard of old glass no bigger than my palm, tinted amber and smudged with soot. It looked like the curved pane of a lantern window. I picked it up carefully and turned it in my hand. The soot rubbed off onto my thumb. The smell hit me then, faint but real, kerosene, sharp and unmistakable. I pocketed it and drove on, feeling watched every mile until I reached home. For the next few weeks, strange things kept happening. Every night near 2 a.m., I'd see a flicker of orange light outside the window, drifting past slow like someone walking with a lamp. Sometimes I'd hear the faint scrape of metal, the same soft clink I'd heard that night on the road. My dog, a mutt named Chester, started growling at the corners of the yard where nothing moved. One night the light stopped directly outside the living room. The curtains glowed amber for a second. Then came 3 soft taps against the window pane, metal against glass, deliberate, spaced apart. I froze. The dog barked once, then whimpered and backed under the couch. I didn't go to the window. I just sat there barely breathing until the glow faded and the house fell silent. The next morning I checked the glass. 3 small soot marks dotted the pane in the pattern of a triangle. That was the night I decided to get rid of the shard. I drove it out past town and tossed it into a dry arroyo. The smell of kerosene lingered on my hands the whole way back. But the thing is, getting rid of it didn't end anything. If anything, it got worse. Every Halloween since then, I get the same dream. I'm standing on that stretch of road outside Fort Davis, the desert wind dead calm. The light appears first, swaying, coming closer with that same unbroken rhythm. I can see the man clearly now. Gray coat, hat low over his face, the lantern hanging from one hand. But when he lifts his head, there's nothing there. No face, no skin, just a hollow glow burning where eyes should be. He raises the lantern and points it straight at me. I wake up drenched in sweat every time, the smell of oil thick in my nose. Last year, I swore I wouldn't drive that route again. I took a longer haul east through Marfa, even though it added an hour. But just past the observatory turnoff, I glanced in the mirror and saw a small orange glow bobbing along the shoulder behind me, keeping pace with the truck, though I was doing 60. It followed for several miles before slipping out of sight around a bend. When I stopped at a rest area, I could still see faint smudges of soot on my side mirror like fingerprints. Folks say he's still walking that road tonight, right now probably. They say he never stops because he's still looking for the way home, the way he never found when the mountains took him. Some say he was searching for his survey markers when the ground gave out and buried him under rock. Others think he's warning drivers, guiding them away from the same fate. But that doesn't explain the tapping, or the way his light appears outside homes miles from the highway. It doesn't explain why I still smell kerosene every October, or why sometimes when I close my eyes I hear that same slow swing of metal, moving back and forth, as though it's just waiting for me to look up and see it burning again. The night I got the call about the car on Ranch Road 171, the sky over Menard County was the color of cold steel, and the wind carried the smell of rain that never came. Dispatch said a trucker had seen an overturned sedan out by the dry wash, hazard lights still blinking, music still playing. He didn't stop, just called it in when he hit cell range again. I was the only deputy on that stretch past midnight, so it fell to me. I remember how empty the road was, how the mesquite and scrub stretched out flat on both sides like an endless sea of shadow. The first thing I saw when I reached mile marker 48 wasn't the car, it was the tracks. A single set of fresh tire impressions cut down the asphalt, perfectly straight, the gravel kicked up behind them. But the direction was wrong. The car had been moving backward. I followed them for maybe a half mile, the beam from my cruiser's spotlight crawling along the pavement until it landed on a shape lying belly up in the ditch. The car was a silver Corolla, maybe 10 years old, one side crushed where it had rolled, the other half buried in red dust. Its headlights were still faintly glowing, and the radio played some old country song warbling through static like it was underwater. I remember the singer's voice. It was low, sad, something about a man coming home to an empty house. I cut the engine, stepped out, and called in my location. The air was dead quiet except for the radio and a faint creaking from the car's frame cooling in the night air. The doors were locked, all 4 windows rolled up. No driver, no blood, no broken glass on the road. I ran my flashlight over the ground. The dirt around the car was disturbed only by my own footprints and the tire tracks that led to it. They didn't start there. They ended there, as if the car had rolled backward half a mile and then flipped by itself. I crouched beside the driver's side, shining my light through the window. The seatbelt was unbuckled, the airbag deflated, and on the passenger seat was a phone still plugged into a charger, its screen glowing faint blue. The music on the radio skipped for a second, like someone was turning the dial, then steadied again on the same song. I tried the door handle, locked tight. When I circled around to the back, I noticed something odd about the license plate. It was clean, too clean. Everything else was coated in a film of dust, except that one metal plate shining like it had just been washed. That's when I heard it, a faint click, then another. It came from the car's transmission, like the gears were shifting, but the keys were nowhere in sight. I stepped back, hand hovering near my holster. The engine was off, the dash lights dark. The car shouldn't have made a sound. I radioed for a tow and waited by my cruiser, keeping my eyes on the wreck. Every few minutes, the radio inside the car would fuzz and hum like someone was trying to tune it. The song kept replaying, the same verse looping, the same voice repeating the same line. "When I get home, you won't be there." Around 1:10 a.m., the tow truck arrived. A local guy named Fred who'd been working county roads longer than I'd been alive. He took one look at the scene and muttered, "Hell of a thing. You see them tracks?" I nodded. "Yeah, they're backward." He frowned. "Ain't right." While he hooked the winch, I followed the tire tracks again, walking slowly along the asphalt. My flashlight beam followed the double line all the way to where it disappeared at a bend in the road. No sign of turning, braking, or skidding. Just smooth, deliberate motion, reverse gear all the way. Halfway along, I noticed patches of dark oil on the road, spaced evenly like drops of something leaking. But when I touched the ground, it wasn't oil. It was dry. The spots looked wet under the light, but they weren't. My skin crawled. I turned back and saw the car had been lifted upright now, the trunk facing me. The rear bumper was dented inward, not outward, like it had been pushed. When I got back, Fred was staring through the windshield. "You hear that?" he asked. The radio was still playing, but the voice had changed. The song was gone. Now it was a voice reading off numbers. I thought it was a station ID at first, something like 101.5, but the pattern kept going, steady and mechanical, like coordinates. 29, 47, 76, pause, 14, 22, 09. "That ain't music," Fred said quietly. I leaned closer. The voice wasn't quite human. Too even, no breath between the words. The phone on the passenger seat flickered, then went dark. The music cut off. The car went silent. We both stood there waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The desert wind picked up, rattling the mesquite, and far off a coyote called. Fred cleared his throat and got back in his truck. We hauled the car to the county impound, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling it was watching us. Every time I looked in the mirror, I half expected to see headlights behind me. When we reached the yard, I signed the paperwork and went inside to log the report. The VIN number didn't match anything on record. The license plate came back, registered to a car reported totaled near Junction in 2011. Same make, same color. The driver had died in the crash. I remember sitting there in the office staring at the file, the hum of the fluorescent lights above me. The report said the car had been found upside down in a ravine. Radio still playing. Song title, When I Get Home. Around 3 a.m., I went back outside for another look. The yard was quiet. All the impounded cars lined up behind chain link. I unlocked the gate, flashlight in hand, and made my way toward the Corolla. It sat in the far corner under a floodlight, glinting like new. But the strange part was the dust. Every other car was covered, but this one looked freshly washed again, as if it had rained only on that one spot. I stepped closer and saw tire tracks leading away from it. The same backward pattern, perfectly straight. The car's rear wheels rested a few inches off the ground. I took a step back, heart hammering, and the radio inside came alive without warning, static. Then that same voice, soft, almost whispering now. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a name. My name. I don't remember drawing my gun, but I had it out, shouting for whoever was there to come out. Nothing. Just the faint hum of electricity. I opened the driver's door. It wasn't locked anymore, and the interior lights blinked on. The seat was empty. The keys were in the ignition, and the gear shift was in reverse. I shut the door and backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the car. It didn't move. The radio clicked off. I locked the gate, got in my cruiser, and left. I didn't write the last part in my report. No one would believe it anyway. But sometimes, when I drive that same stretch past mile marker 48, I catch a glimpse of something in my rear view. A pair of headlights too close, moving backward down the road, keeping perfect pace with me until they fade into the dark. And sometimes faintly, through the static of my CB, I hear a voice humming that same old song. When I get home, you won't be there. It was around midnight when he first noticed the sign, Welcome to Scurry County. The reflective white letters glowed in his headlights as he crossed the line just outside Snyder, that lonely stretch where the two-lane highway ran straight into the dark, like a black ribbon pulled tight across nothing. He didn't think much of it the first time. The sign was old, riddled with buckshot holes. The bottom edge rusted where rain pooled and dripped off. What caught his attention was how it felt like it was closer to the shoulder than it used to be. But maybe that was just his eyes adjusting to the night. He'd been driving since Lubbock, tired and wired on gas station coffee. The flatland, the scrub, the endless fences, everything out there started to blur after midnight. He was heading toward Sweetwater, trying to make it before 2. He had music low, window cracked, the kind of night drive where silence had a weight to it and every mile marker made you feel more alone. He passed through the faint outline of Hermley, a few porch lights scattered across the dark. When he saw the Scurry County sign again, he thought maybe he'd missed a turn. The same dent, same rust, same bullet hole through the U. But his GPS said he hadn't. He slowed, thinking maybe there was another county line curve he didn't know about. Yet when he glanced down at the odometer, he realized he'd only been driving 12 miles since he'd seen it last. There shouldn't have been another one. He drove on, trying to shake it off, but the next 20 minutes stretched thin. No cars in either direction. No lights from houses. The land turned flat again, featureless. Then, up ahead, the same white flash of reflection. Welcome to Scurry County. This time he stopped. Killed the engine. Let the ticking of the cooling hood fill the air. He stepped out with his flashlight. The gravel crunched under his boots and the air was still enough to make his breath sound loud. The sign stood maybe 10 feet from the center line. Its bolts twisted and bent like someone had tried to wrench it free. He touched it. It was cold, damp from dew. The metal post leaned slightly toward the road like it was watching traffic go by. He got back in the truck, turned around, and drove back the way he'd come. 10 minutes later, he saw it again. Same sign, same bent post, same rust streak. He slammed the brakes, skidding gravel. His stomach turned over in a slow roll. He hadn't looped back. He'd been driving straight west according to the compass on the dash. He drove faster now, headlights cutting through the dark, but every few miles the sign appeared again, closer each time. It began standing not just by the shoulder but inches from the pavement, as if creeping toward the middle of the road. He tried calling someone, no signal. He thought about taking a picture, but the idea of looking through his phone's camera made him uneasy. The night pressed closer the farther he drove. He passed a windmill with a missing blade, a leaning barn, and then nothing but the hum of tires on asphalt. He checked the GPS again. It froze, the map gray, a red triangle hovering with no roads beneath it. Then up ahead he saw it once more, dead center of the lane, illuminated perfectly in his high beams. The reflective letters blazed white. "Welcome to Scurry County." He honked, expecting it to be a trick of the light, maybe a fallen billboard, but it didn't move. He slowed until the truck idled 20 feet away. The metal shimmered like wet paint. Beyond it, the highway disappeared into shadow. He leaned out the window and yelled, but his voice came back to him muffled, as if the air itself refused to carry it. He couldn't tell if there was anything behind the sign at all. No fence, no ditch, just darkness that looked too thick to be natural. When he finally edged forward, the sign began to shake. Not from wind, but like something underneath the asphalt was pushing it upward. The bolts popped one by one, metal squealing. The sign slid forward, scraping against the road, dragging its post like a leg. He threw the truck into reverse, tires spinning on gravel. The headlights caught something wet dripping down the metal. Dark streaks that gleamed before vanishing under the beam. He reversed half a mile, heart pounding, until the sign finally disappeared behind the horizon. He kept going backward, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, trying not to think about what he'd seen. After a minute, the headlights picked it up again, closer than before. It wasn't standing now. It was lying flat across the road, blocking both lanes. The letters faced up, glowing white, though his lights hit it at an angle that shouldn't have reflected anything. He swerved into the ditch, bouncing through scrub and dirt until he found another path that merged onto the highway farther down. He stayed on that road until dawn broke, pink light crawling across the plains. When he finally reached a diner outside Sweetwater, he told the waitress what happened. She was an older woman, hair in a bun, coffee pot in hand. She didn't laugh. She just set the pot down and said, "You're not the first." She told him about a wreck 20 years back, a trucker who hit that very sign at midnight. The county replaced it 3 times, but each one went missing. Some said kids stole them. Others said the road itself swallowed them. The new one, she said, was never put up officially. No record in the county logs. But travelers kept seeing it. Always at night. Always moving closer. He didn't touch his food. He just sat there, watching the daylight spread across the window. When he stepped outside again, his truck was coated in dust except for one clean patch across the hood. The outline of a sign. Perfect, down to the bolts. Later that week, a highway patrol officer found his truck abandoned at the county line, engine running. Headlights pointed at an empty stretch of road. In front of it, planted deep into the asphalt, stood a single metal post with a gleaming white plate attached. The letters read, "Welcome to Scurry County." But under the sign, freshly cut into the metal, there was a second line in smaller letters, "Home of James Rowe." That was his name. They said the billboard outside Crane had melted after a tanker explosion back in 2007. The sign used to advertise a local barbecue joint, something with a pig in a hat and a bright red font that you could see glowing in the headlights from half a mile away. When the tanker overturned and caught fire, it scorched everything on that stretch of Highway 385, including the wooden frame and vinyl face of the billboard. What was left afterward was a warped, half-melted sheet of blackened plastic clinging to a rusted steel frame. For years it stood there useless, just a ghost of an old advertisement baking in the sun, until people started saying it wasn't as empty as it looked. Truckers swore it changed depending on who drove past it. I first heard about it while hauling piping from Midland to Fort Stockton. A guy at a truck stop in Crane told me the story between bites of a breakfast sandwich. Said he saw his own ex-wife's face stretched across the melted billboard one night. Her eyes burned out and the words, "Come home," scrawled underneath in white paint. The guy was shaking when he said it. I laughed it off, of course, because every lonely road in Texas has a ghost story. But that billboard got stuck in my head. About a week later, I was on a late-run, empty highway, nothing but my rig and the hum of the tires. The sky had that copper tint you get right after a dust storm passes, and I realized I was coming up on Crane. I remembered what the guy said, so I slowed down when I saw the metal frame in the distance. From far away, it looked like an old shadow waiting by the road. As I drew closer, my headlights cut across it, and for a split second I thought I saw letters where there shouldn't be any. I pulled over onto the shoulder, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled like wet tar and mesquite. The sign leaned slightly, one support half-eaten by rust. Up close, it was just melted vinyl, bubbled and black, nothing that could show an image. But when I stepped back and let my headlights catch it again, faint colors shimmered across the surface. A cow, then a logo, then nothing. It was like seeing reflections from water that wasn't there. I figured it was exhaustion. I'd been driving 10 hours straight. I got back in, told myself to forget about it. But 30 miles down the road, I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. The cow had looked familiar. That night in my motel room in Fort Stockton, I Googled crane-burned billboard just to satisfy my curiosity. There were old photos of the fire, but one grainy image on a message board caught my attention. Someone had taken a picture of the billboard at night, and in the melted vinyl, the faint outline of a man's face was visible. The caption said, "It changes when you drive alone." I didn't sleep much over the next month. I found excuses to take routes that passed Crane. I told myself I wanted to see it again just to prove there was nothing there. Each time it looked a little different. One night it showed the faded red lettering of a gas company logo I remembered from the 90s. Another time it looked blank, perfectly black even under high beams. I started to time my run so I'd reach it around midnight. Then came the night that ended everything normal about my life. It was late September, hot even after sunset. I was hauling empty drums back toward Midland when the air outside started to feel thick and metallic, like breathing through a mouthful of pennies. I saw the outline of the billboard ahead, shimmering slightly as if heat waves were coming off it. My truck's radio glitched to static, then went silent altogether. I slowed down, rolling to a stop across from it. The surface wasn't black anymore. It was glowing faintly orange, like backlit plastic. I could make out an image forming on it, one I couldn't quite identify until I stepped out of the cab. It was a face. My face. Every burned wrinkle of the vinyl had arranged itself into my own reflection. Only wrong, eyes too wide, mouth open as if screaming. Across the bottom, warped letters spelled, "Missing driver, last seen September 23rd. The photo looked like one of those missing person posters you see taped to convenience store windows. Same coloring, same layout, but the date was tomorrow's. I remember backing away, too stunned to move. My headlights flickered once, then cut off completely. The road went dark except for the faint red glow from the sign. I stumbled toward my truck, but the cab light didn't come on when I opened the door. The engine wouldn't turn over either. All I could hear was that dry hum of insects and something else beneath it, a faint crackling sound coming from the direction of the sign. When I turned back, I saw it changing again. The image melted away, replaced by a long stretch of black highway leading off into nothing. In the reflection of my own taillights, I could see tiny white shapes like distant headlights moving along that painted road. Then one of them stopped, reversed, and turned toward me. The glow brightened until I had to shield my eyes. When I looked again, the image had gone dark. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and waited for the lights to come back on. Eventually, they did. The sign was black again. My radio sputtered back to life mid-song. I drove away faster than I ever had before. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every billboard I passed looked warped. Every reflection in my side mirror seemed delayed by half a second. I checked into a motel outside Odessa and tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion. When I woke, the TV in the room was already on. Channel 5 News early morning report. The anchor was talking about an accident outside Crane. A truck had rolled over near the same stretch of highway, burned completely. They hadn't identified the driver yet, but they showed the remains of the tanker and for a moment, the twisted frame of a billboard glowing faintly in the background. I turned the volume up, heart pounding. The anchor said the accident happened at 2:10 a.m. That was around the same time I'd been there. Then the camera angle changed, and for a split second before the clip cut away, I saw something on that billboard again. White letters forming a name. My name. I left the motel within the hour. I told myself I'd never take that route again. But a week later, when dispatch gave me another Midland run, I didn't refuse. Part of me wanted to see if it was still there. Part of me needed to know. I hit Crane just after sunset. The sign stood where it always did, silent and dark. I didn't stop this time. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands tight on the wheel. But out of the corner of my eye as I passed it, I caught one last glimpse of something that froze my blood. There was a new ad up. Not melted, not burned. Clean and freshly printed vinyl stretched tight across the old frame. It showed a smiling man in a company uniform standing beside his truck. The company name on the side of the truck was mine. The man was me. And below it, in bold red letters, the slogan read, "Always delivering, forever on the road." That was 2 years ago. The dispatch office says I never missed a delivery since then. The thing is, I don't remember making any of them. I just keep driving. Every night the same road, the same sky, the same burnt air. And every time I pass Crane, that billboard shines a little brighter as if reminding me what I became. An ad for a man who never stopped. The first time I stopped at gas station, the 214, I almost drove right past it. It was one of those places you don't really notice until you need to. Sitting off the shoulder of Highway 190 somewhere between El Dorado and Menard. The road was empty that night. The kind of deep Texas dark that makes you feel like the whole world's asleep except for you. My tank was almost on E, and my phone had been losing signal for the last 40 miles. When I saw the faded lights of the gas station, just two flickering bulbs under the canopy, it felt like a blessing. The station looked like it had been standing there since the 70s. A flat, one-story building with sun-bleached Coke signs and a torn banner advertising Marlboro Reds. There was no music, no hum of refrigerators inside, not even the buzz of an air conditioner. Just the soft hiss of wind moving dust across the asphalt. The sign on the roof said 214 fuel stop in peeling red letters. I pulled up to the first pump. The numbers on the display weren't digital. They were those old rotating wheels that clicked into place. I almost laughed, thinking how long it had been since I'd seen one. When I lifted the nozzle, I realized there was no card reader. A small printed note was taped under the handle. Pay inside. I looked toward the booth. The lights inside were dim yellow, just bright enough to make out a man behind the glass. He was sitting perfectly still on a stool, staring at something in front of him. From the way the shadows fell, I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he was wearing a uniform shirt, white with a red logo patch on the pocket. The kind old Texaco employees used to wear. I walked up to the door expecting the hum of a chime or at least a creak, but it didn't move. Locked. I tapped on the glass. No reaction. The man didn't blink, didn't shift. His eyes were fixed somewhere past me, like he was staring through me. I waved, then knocked louder. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the small cash tray under the window, the kind where you slide money through. A hand-painted sign above it said, "Insert payment. Pump will activate." It looked like it had been there for decades. I leaned closer to the glass and saw the register screen glowing faintly. It wasn't the kind of screen you'd see today. It was a green monochrome display like something from an old computer. The numbers were frozen on it. Reg 1 open, 08-14-1988, 020. I frowned and took a step back. The date had to be some kind of glitch, right? Maybe the system had never been updated, but something about that number stuck with me, like it was trying to mean something. I slid a 20 into the tray. A second later, the pump behind me clicked on. I hadn't heard any relay switch or mechanical sound, it just started like magic. I filled up and turned back toward the window. The man inside still hadn't moved. I called out, "Hey, you good in there?" Nothing. It was eerie, standing in that silence with only the soft ping of my car cooling down behind me. The wind had picked up slightly, and it carried that dry metallic smell you get before a thunderstorm. I knocked again. This time I pressed my face closer to the glass. The man's skin was pale, almost gray in the light. His hair was neatly combed and his uniform looked spotless, like he'd just put it on. His eyes were open, wide, and his mouth was barely parted. That's when I realized he wasn't breathing. I stumbled back, my heartbeat hammering in my throat. I stared at him for what felt like a full minute, waiting for the smallest sign of movement. Then slowly I saw something flicker in the glass, not from him, but from behind him. A light blinked in the dark hallway at the back of the store like the overhead fluorescent had just sputtered to life. For a second, I thought maybe someone else was inside, someone who could explain what the hell was going on. I squinted, trying to see through the dusty window. The hallway looked empty, except for a row of shelves stacked with yellowing boxes. The light kept flickering, buzzing weakly. Then I saw it, just for a second, a shadow crossing the hall. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. The proportions didn't make sense. The head was too low, like it was bent over or crawling. I jumped back, nearly tripping over the curb. My first thought was to get the hell out of there. But before I could move, I heard a faint noise from the pump. A static crackle, like a voice whispering through a busted speaker. I turned toward it. The old pump handle was vibrating slightly, and through the noise I heard a voice, soft and broken, like someone talking through a storm of interference. "Don't come back." The words were faint but clear enough that I knew I hadn't imagined them. I dropped the nozzle and ran to my car. My hand shook so badly I fumbled the keys twice before starting the engine. As I pulled away, I glanced once more at the booth. The man was still there, still motionless. But now his head was turned ever so slightly toward me. His mouth was open wider, like he was trying to scream but couldn't make a sound. I drove until I hit the next town and pulled into a diner parking lot. I sat there for a while, trying to calm down, telling myself it was exhaustion or a trick of the light. But something made me check my tank gauge. It still read empty. I got out and opened the gas cap. Dry, no smell of fuel, no sign I'd ever pumped anything. My $20 were gone. That night, I called the local sheriff's office to report what I saw. They told me there was no active gas station on that stretch of Highway 190. Station 214? The deputy said. That place has been closed for years, burned down in 1988. Lightning strike killed the attendant inside. I didn't say anything for a long time. The date ran through my head again, 08/14/1988. A week later, I drove the same route during daylight, just to prove to myself it was nothing. The coordinates were burned into my memory, so I knew I was in the right place. There was nothing there now, just cracked concrete, overgrown weeds, and the faint outline of the old fuel bays. I walked around for a few minutes, kicking through debris and brush. When I turned back toward the road, I noticed something small half buried in the dirt. I dug it out. It was a metal name tag, the kind you pin on a uniform. The red letters were faded, but still legible. Dennis, attendant. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him sitting behind the glass, frozen in that same stillness. The green glow of the register casting his face in that sickly light. I kept hearing that whisper too, "Don't come back," like it was inside my head now. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of my car alarm going off. When I ran outside, the car was fine, doors locked. But on the windshield, written in a streak of greasy black dust, were 4 words: Reg 1 open, 1988. I sold the car the next week. I stopped driving that highway entirely. But sometimes on stormy nights, I still dream about that place. The flickering canopy lights, the man who never blinked, the static voice on the pump. And when I wake up, I can smell it again. The faint, bitter scent of gasoline. The stretch of I-10 west of Ozona is an empty, endless place. The kind of Texas highway where your thoughts get louder the longer you drive. It was past midnight. The air outside dry and cold, and I had been behind the wheel for 7 hours straight, my headlights cutting a pale path through the darkness. I was heading home from San Antonio to El Paso after a late delivery, and fatigue had started to creep up my neck, settling behind my eyes. The radio barely picked up anything but static, and the hum of the tires had become a steady lullaby threatening to pull me under. That's when I saw him. He was standing by the shoulder near a faded green sign that said, Ozona 12 miles. Just a silhouette at first, his arm raised in that unmistakable thumb-out gesture. He looked like a ranch hand. Denim jacket, hat slouched low, jeans covered in dust. Nothing unusual out there. People still hitched rides between towns, especially where cell service vanished for miles. I slowed down, rolled the passenger window halfway, and called out, "You headed west?" The man nodded once, slow, and stepped closer. His face was shadowed, but he looked young, maybe late 30s, clean-shaven. "Just need a lift a bit down the road," he said. His voice was even, polite, the kind that didn't raise alarms. I unlocked the door. He climbed in without a sound, shut it gently, and thanked me. The cab filled with the faint smell of rain-wet earth, though the sky had been bone dry all evening. I told him I could take him to the next truck stop near Sheffield. He nodded again and said softly, "That's fine, Ray, that's plenty far enough." I froze. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. He had said my name. At first I thought I'd misheard. Maybe he said sir, and my brain filled in the rest. I told myself not to overthink it, not out there in the dark. But then he turned his head toward me, and I saw his eyes clearly for the first time. Calm, knowing, not afraid to meet mine. "You've been on the road too long tonight," he said. "You missed the rest stop an hour back because you don't like pulling over when the lot's empty. You figure it's safer to keep rolling." The way he said it wasn't a question. My throat went dry. "How do you know that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He didn't answer. He just looked back out the windshield and said, "Your taillight's cracked. Been that way for 3 weeks. You keep telling yourself you'll fix it when you get home, but you won't. A chill spread through me, slow and deliberate. The hum of the tires seemed louder now, like they were grinding over gravel even though the asphalt was smooth. "Did we meet before?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "No, but I've been waiting to ride with you a long time." We drove in silence for a while after that. The road stretched ahead like a thin ribbon, no other headlights in sight. My hands were slick with sweat. The heater clicked softly and each sound felt amplified. The wipers ticking, the fan blowing, my pulse in my ears. He spoke again. "You still keep that picture of your dad in the glove box?" My heart gave a hard thud. I did. A little Polaroid of me and my father from 1986, taken outside his shop in Midland. Nobody knew about it except my wife, maybe my brother. I kept it tucked behind my registration papers. "I don't know who you are," I said, my voice breaking a little. "But you need to tell me right now what this is." He didn't even look my way. "You ever wonder why he died that day, Ray? The blowout on Highway 385? Everyone said it was bad luck. Old tires. But you know better, don't you?" I hit the brakes hard enough that the truck fishtailed. The seatbelt cut into my shoulder. He just sat there, hands folded on his knees, as calm as if nothing had happened. I pulled over onto the shoulder, heart hammering. "Get out," I said. "Get the hell out of my truck." He turned to me slowly. "You want me gone? All right, just say her name first." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "Your wife," he said. "Say her name." I hesitated, not understanding. "Claire," I said finally. The moment I spoke it, the passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. No sound, no movement. He was just gone. The seatbelt he'd been wearing still hung loose, swaying slightly as if something invisible had brushed against it. I jumped out of the truck, scanning the road, the ditch, the mesquite scrub stretching into darkness. Nothing. Just the hum of the engine and the wind pushing sand across the pavement. I climbed back in, trembling. I drove fast, eyes darting to the mirrors every few seconds. When I reached the Sheffield stop, I pulled in under the harsh white lights and ran inside. The clerk, an older woman with a name tag that read Maria, gave me a startled look. "Everything okay, hon?" she asked. "There was a man. I picked him up back near Ozona. He knew things about me. Then he disappeared." She frowned and leaned on the counter. "You say near Ozona?" "Yeah," she sighed slow. "You're not the first to say that. Folks been seeing someone thumbing rides around there for years. Always looks normal, always polite. Then he vanishes. Some say he died on that stretch in '98 when a cattle truck rolled over. Driver burned alive inside. They never recovered the body." I felt my stomach drop. "You're kidding." She shook her head. "No joke. He used to run a small ranch near Ozona. Name was Ray too, funny enough." The name hit me like a blow. I laughed nervously, but it came out wrong, thin and shaky. "That's impossible," she shrugged. "Lot of strange things out here after dark. You get some rest before you drive again." I sat in the truck for nearly an hour before pulling back onto the highway. Every shadow by the roadside looked like someone standing there. I told myself it was exhaustion, stress, maybe a dream behind the wheel. But when I reached into the glove box to check for my dad's photo, it wasn't there. In its place was a single piece of paper, yellowed and curled at the edges. Written in small, shaky letters across it were 4 words that made my breath catch. "I know her too, Ray." The next morning, I showed the note to a mechanic at a gas station in Fort Stockton. He said it looked like it had been written years ago. The ink faded, the paper brittle. I tore it up and threw it away, but I couldn't shake the smell it carried. Dust, smoke, and something faintly like rain. I haven't driven that stretch near Ozona since. I take the longer route south now, through Del Rio, even though it adds hours to the trip. Sometimes, though, when the weather turns dry and the radio cuts out, I swear I can hear a voice in the static saying my name, soft and familiar, waiting for me to answer. There's a place about 30 miles north of Pecos where Route 285 starts to flatten out. The kind of stretch where you can drive for an hour without seeing another set of headlights. Out there between the dry gulches and the rust-colored bluffs, there's a turnoff that doesn't lead to anything. It's a strip of cracked pavement maybe 20 yards long, ending in a patch of hardpan dust and scattered beer cans. At the very end of it stands a payphone, just the booth alone in the desert, no wires leading anywhere, no sign that it ever had power. The glass panels are half gone, the door hangs crooked, and the receiver's cord has been stretched and twisted like someone pulled it too far. No one knows who put it there. Some folks say it's been there since the 60s. Others claim it showed up out of nowhere sometime in the 90s, like one of those ghost lights people talk about on old highways. The first time I heard about it was from a man at a truck stop outside Orla. I'd pulled in to fill up around midnight. He was sitting at the counter drinking black coffee. A weathered old guy with a beard that looked like tumbleweed. He told me he'd once called that phone. Said there's a number scrawled across the metal panel with a Sharpie. Written so deep into the rust it looks burned in. You dial that number, he said, and you'll hear yourself answer. Not your voice, though. Just something that knows what to say. I laughed it off, figuring it was another roadside ghost story told to spook travelers. But a week later, curiosity got the better of me. I was on a delivery run to Fort Stockton, passing right through that area. The desert was still and silent, just a dull hum in my tires and the sound of wind whistling through the cracked weather stripping. Around 2 in the morning, I saw the turnoff. It was easy to miss, barely more than a jagged shoulder of asphalt. I pulled over, headlights cutting through the dust. The booth stood there like a skeleton under the moonlight, glass panes shining pale and fractured. The payphone inside looked impossibly old. Rotary dial, coin slot crusted with dirt, receiver blackened by sun and time. And sure enough, just under the dial, written in shaky block letters, was a phone number, 432-554-9812. There was no signal on my phone, of course. Out there, you barely get radio. But when I lifted the receiver, I heard a faint hum, like the static of an empty line. It shouldn't have worked at all. The cord was frayed, the metal box dented open in places where wiring hung loose, but there it was. A dial tone, thin and distant. I stood there for a long minute before pulling out my own cell phone and punching in the number. It rang once, then twice, then I heard it. My own ringtone. It was coming from inside my truck. I turned, the receiver still pressed to my ear, and stared through the windshield. My phone was sitting in the cup holder, screen dark, but it was vibrating. Not the full sound of a ringtone, but a muted buzz with something under it. A whisper, maybe? I hung up quickly, heart pounding, and walked back to the truck. When I checked my phone, the call log said I'd just answered a call from unknown. I didn't remember touching it. I told myself it had to be a glitch. Maybe the number redirected somehow, like one of those prank call lines. But that didn't explain the fact that the payphone worked without wires, or the way my phone had answered on its own. I tried to shake it off and got back on the road, but a mile or so later I started hearing static over my radio. It wasn't tuned to anything, just a low hiss, and underneath it a faint voice. I couldn't make out the words at first. Then I realized it was saying my name. Not shouting it, not whispering it, just repeating it in a calm, steady tone. Eli. Eli. I turned off the radio, but the sound kept going, soft and close, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat speaking just above a breath. I pulled over and sat there in the dark. The desert air felt colder than it should have. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, that maybe I'd dozed off and imagined the whole thing. I turned on my hazard lights, got out, and walked around the truck. No one was there. But when I opened the passenger door to check the glove box, the seatbelt was buckled. I didn't go back to that stretch of road for almost a year. But some stories have a way of sticking to you, and that one did. It followed me, showing up in half-remembered dreams in the quiet moments before sleep. I'd wake up thinking I heard a phone ringing from the kitchen, only to find nothing there. Once, while fueling up outside Midland, I overheard 2 men talking about the same booth. One said a friend of his had gone out there on a dare, called the number, and swore someone picked up from inside his truck bed. Said he never went near that route again. Last month I made the mistake of going back. I wanted proof this time, something to show it was just an old relic, a story blown out of proportion. I drove out before sunrise when the desert's still gray and empty. The booth looked worse now, half sunk in the dirt. The metal warped like it had been through a fire. The number was still there, though. I dialed it from my phone and set it to speaker. Ring, ring. Then I heard my own voice answer. Hello? For a second I thought it was a playback, like maybe the booth echoed your own call. But then it spoke again. Eli, don't hang up. My stomach dropped. The voice was mine, but not quite. Too smooth, too calm, like something imitating me. Who is this? I said. You shouldn't have come back. I felt something move behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing, just pressure like the air thickened. My truck's headlights flickered. On the phone, the other me laughed. A dry, broken sound that didn't belong in the open desert. You left me here, it said. You walked away. I hung up and bolted for the truck. The cab light came on when I opened the door, and for just a moment I saw someone sitting in the driver's seat. My seat, same jacket, same hair. He turned his head and smiled. Then the light went out. I don't remember getting home. I must have driven for hours, but when I checked my odometer the next morning, it hadn't moved. The gas gauge was still full. My phone, though, it had one new entry in the call log. The same number, 432-554-9812, listed as missed call, 1:17 a.m. I didn't make that call. I was still out there then. Now every few nights the phone rings, always at the same time. Always that number. I've stopped answering. Sometimes when I'm driving near Route 285, my headlights catch something glinting off the highway shoulder. Metal and glass reflecting the moon. The booth is gone, but I still see it. Standing there in the dark, receiver swinging in the wind. Last night my phone rang again. This time I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it this morning, the message was 6 seconds of static, and underneath it, so faint I could barely make it out, was my own voice saying, "Come pick me up." The night had pushed the heat down into the caliche and cracked it wide, but the air still smelled like summer, dry and mineral, and a little like hot pennies. I rolled down the windows because the air conditioner on my old Ford had given up in June, and I told myself the wind would be enough for the drive home. It was close to 11 when I left Fort Stockton. The Walmart lot was thinning out, the last of the Friday people rolling carts toward dusty sedans, headlights cutting across the stack of propane tanks and the pallet of mulch that no one was buying anymore. I had a case of bottled water in the back seat and a sack of cat food sliding on the vinyl. My fingers smelled like hand soap that claimed to be lavender. The smell of gasoline hit me before I made the turn onto 285. Cold and chemical. Wrong on a night like that. I thought it was the truck in front of me, a long flatbed with a pipe rack and 3 orange triangles that never seemed to stop winking. I let him get distance, watching the red dots shrink and the smell softened, as if it were afraid of the wind. I took the ramp for 285 north and felt the car settle into that West Texas hum, the kind you can feel in your chest if you let your jaw go loose. The sky had that chalky band you get before midnight, when the last shops go dark and the light from the highway rules the world, and I decided it was a stray whiff, a ghost of the town that would blow off by the time I reached the prison museum sign. But it didn't blow off. It climbed into the car with me. It sat on the passenger seat like a wet coat. I checked the dash and saw the fuel gauge steady where it always stuck, a third of a tank no matter what I did. I checked the mirror. The trunk was shut. The cap had come off once before on a bumpy road near Coyanosa, and I had learned the lesson of tying it with baling twine like my father taught me. Still, the smell came, sweet and sharp and a little like the inside of a tire shop. And I breathed through my mouth and told myself it was a trick of the brain. The way it can hand you a song you heard in 10th grade or the face of a teacher you'd forgotten. The wind picked up and pressed the windows, but the smell did not leave. It sat with me the way a thought will sit with you when you think you've thrown it out. By the time I hit the turnoff for the wind farm, the smell had become a promise. I pulled onto the shoulder, bumped along the rumble strip, and put on my hazards. The night came at me in a black wave when I opened the door. The grass was dry and rattled like paper. I stood there and listened to the tick of the engine cooling and the breath of far trucks and the sound the wires make when they get loose and complain to the poles. I walked to the back and touched the cap. It was tight enough to hurt my fingers. The lines under the car were dry. I put my hand under and pulled it back and sniffed it. Dust and heat, no gasoline. When I came around to the front, I saw it, tucked under the wiper blade like the note from a cop in the city. Neat as a business card. A book of matches, the old kind with the paper back, folded and creased so it would stay. Half of it was gone, charred to a velvet black. The other half kept its colors, a pale sky blue with a skinny mallard flying over water. I knew that logo without reading the words. The Blue Quail Motor Inn, white script over the river. The motel sign had leaned crooked outside Fort Stockton as long as I could remember, even when I was a kid, even before they gave up on repainting. I knew that place because I had stayed there once on a night when I couldn't go home. The paper was warm in my hand. The char rubbed off on my fingers and left a smear that smelled like sulfur and something else. The chill under my ribs was a handful of ice dropped into river water. The wind lifted hair off my neck and set it down again. There are pranksters everywhere, and lonely stretches make a girl think too much. That was what I told myself, standing in the headlight haze, holding the half-burned matches like a bad omen. Somebody at the Walmart lot could have slipped it there. The heat from the hood would make it warm. That was reasonable. I slid it out completely because the idea of it under the blade felt wrong, a thing riding with me uninvited, and I put it in the pocket of the door because I didn't like the thought of throwing it in the grass and starting something I couldn't control. When I started the engine again, the smell came stronger. It was as if closing the door had trapped it with me. I rolled the windows lower. The wind made the seatbelt whistle. The cat food bag thumped in the back and made me jump. I told myself stories about cracked tanks and phantom smells and the way the brain can make an odor out of a thought. I told myself I had been thinking about the blue quail more than I admitted. I didn't think about why. The miles after midnight stretched like rubber. Coyanosa flashed past as a cluster of lights and a broken sign for burritos that hadn't been made since Easter. There was the smell, and then there was the road and the two braided, until I couldn't tell what belonged to what. At a little pull-off with a state trash barrel half full of beer cans, I gave up and pulled over again. My hands had begun to tremble, and I decided it was better to stand in the heat for a minute and steady them. I sat there with the engine idling and the hazards clicking, the tick-tick matching my heart, though I knew that was impossible, and the radio, which I never turned on, hissed like a snake. I don't remember touching the dial. The light on the face of the old Pioneer came up from black and settled on AM. A voice spoke from a far place. It was a preacher's tone without words, a cadence riding up and down an empty hill. The gasoline smell made the inside of my mouth taste sour and metal. I turned the radio off and the voice didn't stop right away. It took a heartbeat or two to remember to die. When I got out again, the night had leaned closer. The wind had gone down and the dark had weight. I went around the car, the little flashlight in my glove box throwing out a thin circle like a coin in the dirt. I crouched and checked again, and as I came up, the beam skimmed the windshield and I saw the second one. Another matchbook, tucked exactly like the first. The char this time ate more than half. There weren't many matches left. The cardboard was soft. When I touched it, I pulled my hand back because it was warm the way a breath is warm, not the way an engine is warm. I put my palm on the hood and felt the heat. Then I touched the matchbook again and the difference was plain. It was like putting two fingers on the throat of a sleeping cat and feeling the purr that wasn't yours. I did what you do when the world refuses to be what it was 5 minutes ago. I laughed. It was too loud in the empty place and I swallowed it. I looked over my shoulder at the empty dirt road that led nowhere. I waited for the prickling feeling to pass and it didn't. Behind the windshield, in the faint reflection the flashlight made, I imagined a face. I promised myself it was only that. The mind makes faces out of knots in wood and the pattern of popcorn on a ceiling. I took the matchbook and put it with the first one in the door pocket. The smell seemed to thicken like fog in a movie. When I sat down, the radio came alive even though the dial still looked dead, and the voice this time said a word that I knew was not in English, and then another that was. It said strike. It said it on a long breath and made the K rattle at the end. I turned the key all the way off and sat there, and the night got very close. The blue quail had not been much even when it tried. In a life made of small carefulnesses, a night there had been a crooked nail. I had been younger and thin with want and married to a man who loved the sound of the pump jack more than he loved anything that stayed still. He was not cruel. He was a shadow shaped like a man who went out at dark and came back with flame on his clothes that the shower could not wash out. After a fight about something we both pretended was small, I had driven too fast and missed the turn to home because I did not want to go where my stubbornness would be measured like flour on a scale. The blue quail took me in the way a ditch takes rain. I lay on the bed with the spread pulled tight as a drum and I watched commercials until dawn. I was not the kind of woman who forgot a night like that. What I had tried to forget was the morning after, when I walked past the office and the man behind the glass said, "Ma'am, your jacket smells like gasoline," and I realized he was right. The smell had been in my clothes even then. It had clung to me because earlier I had stood outside watching a flare stack burn, and the wind had carried it to me as if it had something to say. Now another book of matches lay on my car like a patient note. The heat in it had no business being there. The word from the radio sat on my tongue. I started the engine because forward motion is an old magic and we trust it even when it cannot save us. The smell came with me, heavier than before. I rolled all the windows and let the wind slap my cheeks until my eyes watered. The car moved through the dark like a boat cutting black water. Sodium lights rose in pairs and fell behind me. I passed the rest area where a handful of cars slept open-mouthed and a man stretched by the soda machines, his face strobing as the Coke logo flickered. I wanted to stop and stand under that harsh, safe light and talk to a stranger about nothing until the sun came up. I kept going because home was another old magic and I could see its porch light in my mind. I did not make it to home on the next stretch. A blue light winked in my mirror and my heart did the thing it does when a uniform asks you to pull over. I slid onto the shoulder and killed the engine and sat with my hands at 10 and 2 and told myself I was going to be polite and breathing and explain the smell myself. The flashlight that came along the shoulder swung like a metronome. The officer bent to the window and the light found my face and the smell moved like a snake. "Ma'am," he said, "are you aware you've got something going on with your fuel?" I opened my mouth and then closed it. I nodded because words wanted to break in the middle if I tried them. He leaned in a little. "It's strong. Step out for me." He was a Pecos County deputy by the patch and his voice was as tired as any night worker. In the shoulder glare, he walked me to the back and crouched and did exactly what I had done, which somehow made everything worse. When you see your fear on someone else's face, it puts a window in your own head and lets cold in. He straightened and sniffed and frowned at the cap. He turned and looked at the windshield and I watched his eyes change when he saw the third one. It had been placed while my hands were still on the wheel, while his blues were in my mirror. It stuck there friendly as a note from a lover. He reached for it. He touched the edge and then he jerked his hand away the way I had. He didn't say why. He took his hat off and scratched the white line his hair made. "Blue quail," he said. "Huh." He slid a finger under the wiper and eased it out and he held it in the beam and looked at the char, which by now ate everything but 2 matches. The paper sagged a little in the middle like it had a heartbeat. He looked up at me and then he made a decision you could hear. He walked back to his cruiser and put the matchbook on the trunk lid and came back and asked for my license and where I was headed. I told him McCamey and he asked if anyone would be there and I said yes. He stood there for a slow count and then he nodded as if I had passed. He said, "Go on then. Roll with the windows down. If you get to Crane and you still smell it, pull into the station at the Y and tell Jess. He'll put you on a lift. Don't stop before then. Don't stop again on the shoulder. Can you do that?" I said yes like a school child and then I made the mistake of looking at the back of his cruiser. The matchbook was gone. He had left it there a minute or two and the wind had not come up and nothing had gone past. The dark sat where it sat. The trunk lid wore a gray ash print as if a moth had landed and burned. I felt the laugh trying to climb my throat. I pressed it down. I thanked him. He tipped his hat. He backed up with a care that made me imagine him thinking about his own children. I pulled out like a grandmother and watched his lights fade in the glass and the smell came into the car like a slow tide. Crane was farther than it had any right to be. The road stretched itself and made me small. The wind worked my shirt and made the fabric sing. The radio, which was off, hummed in a key you could barely hear. I kept the needle at 60 and counted pump jacks. If I moved my tongue, I could taste the match head. I drove through a patch of air that was colder than the rest and felt it push at my shoulder like a hand. I began to say the names of the towns out loud because the sound of my own voice made me believe in my own body. I said Fort Stockton and McCamey and Rankin and Balmerhea, and for a moment the smell thinned like a curtain you can see through if you stand close. The light ahead gathered itself and became the Y, the big lot with a station on one side and a diner on the other and trucks sitting like sleeping animals. I took the turn slow and parked by the pump, where a cone leaned like a drunk. The smell was high and light, almost frisky, as if pleased to be seen. I got out and the night inside the station's light felt raw and bright. The moths batting themselves silly, and the speaker over the door giving up a soft hiss of someone else's country song. A man in coveralls came out wiping his hands on a rag that had once been white. He had a face made to listen. "Jess," I said, "the deputy said you'd look." He looked at the car and then at me and nodded the way a man nods when a story is coming at him and he knows he can't stop it. He walked around the Ford and crouched and ran his fingers under the tank and then stood and sniffed and frowned the way we all had. He reached to the windshield and stopped with his hand halfway. I looked and saw the fourth one. It was a sliver now. 2 blackened sticks like the legs of some small insect and a flap of cardboard with part of the queue still showing. The air around it felt warmer than the hood. Jess let his hand fall. He did not touch it. He said, "I don't like this." He said it flat, not for my benefit. He went inside and came out with a plastic deli tub full of water, and he held it out to me and said, "Drop that in there, would you?" I did. The water hissed like a cat. Jess put the tub on the ground like a thing you could step around and got a flashlight the size of a baton. He crawled under and ran the light across the belly of the car, and it picked out dust and bolts and old oil. He said, "You don't have a leak." He said it the way a man tells you a lump isn't cancer and then clears his throat. He stood and wiped his hands again and looked at the tub and then at me. He asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. We went inside and stood at the counter where a woman with gray hair and a tattoo of a cedar on her wrist poured something that tasted like old pennies but was hot and real. The smell came in with us. It threaded through the smell of fryer oil and lemon mop, and it made the ceiling fans look slower. Jess pretended not to notice and then could not. He looked at the door. He said, "There's a stool in the back if you want to sit a minute." I said I should get home. He nodded. He said if it were me, I would not stop between here and your driveway. He looked at me then like a man who knows he is handing you a stupid order and asks you to follow it anyway. I stepped back into it like stepping back into rain. The matchbook in the tub had gone out, but a thin ring of steam rose from the water, as if it remembered heat. I took the driver's door and hesitated because something in the air had changed. The smell had a skin to it now. It touched the back of my throat the way fear does when it is no longer a thought but a shape. I slid in and closed the door, and the radio found a station on its own, and a voice came from 1,000 miles away, and the word this time was careful. I put the car in gear because there was nothing else to do. The road between Crane and McCamey is not long, and it is lonely in a different register. The pump jacks thicken. The flare stacks pop like red flowers. The air goes sour in places no one talks about, and the ground blisters under your shoes in July. My father had driven it 20 years and said you could fall asleep with your eyes open because the landscape hid nothing. Tonight it hid everything. The smell braided itself with the hot night and grew into something I could see. In the corner of my right eye, just inside the window, there was a shimmer like a heat mirage, and behind the shimmer a silhouette that made no sense. It sat where the passenger would sit if there had been one. It had weight because the seat made a sound and dipped a hair on certain bumps. It had a patience I knew the way you know the patience of a fire when it waits for the wind. I did not turn my head. I watched the white lines go under the hood and told myself how to breathe. The radio said another word: strike. At the sign for McCamey, the smell climbed into my sinuses so fast I thought I would be sick. The town's lights looked like the reflection of a fire in a dark window. I turned onto my street where the creosote bushes hunker like old men, and a dog 2 houses down barks at the same truck every night. My porch had the bulb I forgot to replace. I pulled into the drive, and the gravel made its familiar noise, and the smell should have thinned with relief, but it did not. It leaned closer. I put the car in park and sat with the engine running and my hands on the wheel and the radio breathing. I told myself there was a way to make it normal. I turned the key and the car shuddered and went quiet, and in the instant of silence between engine and night I heard a small sound from under the wiper. A click like a fingernail on a match head. I reached up and rubbed my eyes, and then I got out very slowly, and the air in my yard felt heavier than it should. The crickets were working hard. The neighbor's swamp cooler shuddered. I walked to the front of the car, and there it was. The last one. It was not charred to a sliver because there was nothing left to char. It was a single match lying under the wiper blade, dry and white as a bone along its stick with a head like a tiny bruise. I reached for it before I knew I was reaching, and when my fingers closed on it, the world jumped. Heat rolled up my arm. Not the heat of the engine or the day or the desert, but a gathered heat that had waited in a small body and now had its chance. I dropped it into the driveway and stumbled, and my hip hit the fender and my hand left a black streak on the paint. The match did not fall like a dead thing. It balanced a second, on an edge as if someone were holding it, and then it lay flat and I could smell the head. The smell made the first night at the Blue Quail rise up like a station coming into range. The office light on me, the man behind the glass, the odor in my jacket, a flare in the distance like a red flower, a fight with my husband that edged up to a threat and then stood there and looked at me, the road I took instead of home, the thought I had on the bed with the drum-tight spread, the thought that all it took to change anything was friction, that the night could be made into something else with a single sound, that there were people who listened to houses burn the way others listened to rain. I went to the porch and put my key in the lock and turned it, and the door stuck the way it always does and opened the way it always does. My cat lifted his head on the couch and blinked like a saint. The house smelled like dust and the lemon cleaner I only remember to use in spurts. I stood in the entry and put my hand against the wall and cried once without sound. The smell came in with me like a person. It moved past me toward the kitchen and then sideways toward the hallway as if deciding. I closed the door. The radio on the car stayed on even with the key out. I could hear it through the open window. The voice said a word that could have been now or could have been no. I locked the deadbolt and put the chain on and leaned my forehead against the wood and laughed once and swallowed it again. The match lay on the gravel like a small white thing that washed up. I washed my hands. The sink shuddered in the particular way it has when the line at the back decides to complain. I watched the black on my fingers go down the drain and made myself watch because not watching felt worse. In the kitchen drawer there were 3 books of matches I never used. Free ones with the number for a pizza place that had closed and the phone number for a pump company that had changed owners. I took them out and lined them on the counter. I opened one and looked at the soft sticks and shut it and put them back. I made tea because heat felt like something I could argue with. I picked up my phone and opened the deputy's card and stared at the number and did not press it. The radio outside whispered in the voice of 2 states away. The smell eased and then came back. Sleep was out of the question. I sat in the chair near the front window with the tea cooling on the side table and watched the car. The porch light gave the windshield a coat of milk. The match on the gravel could have been a twig. A moth battered itself against the globe and looked like a small hand. Time wore a track of its own and I rode it until I heard it again. That tiny sound like a fingernail on a rough strip. It did not come from the windshield. It came from the slot in the door where the old mail flap is even though our mailboxes are on the curb. I had a memory of a child slipping valentines through there and running away. That quick hard sound of paper on metal. I stood and the house moved under my feet. I reached the door and put my ear to it. The smell was strong enough to have shape. I opened the flap and looked down at the basket I keep for flyers, and the thing in it was not a flyer. It was another matchbook. The blue quail and pale sky blue, the mallard flying. The paper was warm when I picked it up, not the warmth of hands. The remembered warmth of a house the day after a fire. When I opened it, I saw there were no matches. They had been torn away from the strip so cleanly. It looked like the mouth of a person who never grew teeth. On the inside in tidy printed letters was a room number and a date. The date was a January from years ago. The room number was the one I had. I had not paid with a card. I had paid cash. I had not given my name. I had not told the man behind the glass anything. He had known anyway. Or someone had. I put the matchbook on the table and stood very still and listened to the house breathing. The cat stepped into the doorway and made his question sound, and I said his name and he came and leaned into my shin. The smell pushed at me like a blunt tool. The radio outside changed station without changing station. And now it was not a preacher and not weather and not music. It was a tape of tires on gravel and the slam of a car door. It was a woman breathing as if she had been running and then trying not to sound like she had. It was a man saying something I could not hear. Not a bad thing, not even a mean thing. Just a human thing that had the shape of disappointment, and then the sudden quiet that comes after a sound. You didn't know you were listening to ends. The word that came after was mine. It was my name. Nobody on earth would have known it from that night. Nobody but me and the walls of that room who had held the sound and kept it. I went to the door and put my hand on the deadbolt and did not turn it. I told myself it was a coincidence, and then I told myself it wasn't. And then I told myself that it didn't matter what it was because it was in my house now. When I turned around, the hall looked longer than it had any right to be, and the far end where my bedroom door stood open looked like a mouth. The cat's tail made a question mark. I walked to the kitchen because the kitchen had knives and bright lights and the ugly, cheery calendar with pictures of barns. I stood and put my hands on the counter and felt the laminate seam and the nick where I dropped a saucepan in March. The smell went to my left. I went to my right. In a drawer there were lighters and a can of Sterno and a half-used citronella candle for the porch. I took none of it. I stood and breathed and tried to remember my father's voice when he told me to turn off the house gas after a bad storm. I went to the water heater closet and checked it, and the pilot light made its polished blue boat and nothing else. I checked the stove and it sat cold and innocent. I stood and waited for the sound that would tell me where to put my fear. It did not come. It ended dumb in the way some things end. No flash, no apparition. No voice that raises hair and sets you on a road you cannot leave. The matchbook on the table cooled. The smell in the house thinned until it was only a ghost over the sink and a whisper in the hallway. And then it was in the vents like dust you only notice in winter. The radio outside found the static that belonged to it and stayed. I stood on the porch when the first thin idea of dawn colored the edge of the street, and the wind moved from south to southeast and smelled like a place that had never burned. The match in the driveway looked exactly like a match in a driveway. I picked it up because it was mine whether I wanted it or not. It was cool now, perfectly ordinary, and I could have struck it on the red strip under the flap and watched the head go to light, and it would have been nothing at all. I slid it into the Blue Quail booklet and shut it and held the weight of it. The Ford ticked as if something inside it were cooling down from a very small blaze. Behind my neighbor's fence, a dog jingled his tags and sneezed. I stood there and told myself I had survived the night and that sometimes that is all a person does and it is enough. When I went inside, the cat had found the matchbook on the table and was batting at it in that prim way cats have. I set it on the highest shelf by the bowls I never used for guests and told myself I would forget it. I did not forget it. It took me 3 weeks to throw it away, and when I did, the man in the truck did not come and the radio did not speak and the house did not catch. I am not supposed to say what happens after that because it would turn this into something else. A lesson or a warning or a comfort. I will say that months later, I drove past the Blue Quail sign and saw the last of the blue paint slough off in the wind like a long-held breath, and the script was bare wood, and I felt a tug under my ribs like a fish. I will say that on summer nights when the heat sits on the town like a blanket and the flare stacks make flowers, I sometimes smell gasoline where there is none, and when I do, I drive straight through and I do not stop. And if I get home and find anything tucked under my wiper, I take it inside and set it in a bowl of water and watch the steam that rises. The little faithful thread, and I think of the way a match will give you exactly one magic and keep the rest for itself. On a night when the rain was trying and failing and the gutters had their own small song, I woke up from a dream about the office glass and the door with its bell and the red neon that does not hum in real life, and I went to the kitchen for water, and there was the smell standing by the sink like a person. It leaned in as if to ask a question, and the question was the same one I'd been asking, and I understood then that it wasn't trying to drive me off the road or boom a warning from the sky. It was only trying to be noticed, the way a thing tries to be noticed when it has been with you so long it thinks it owns the right. I opened the back door and the wind came in stern and clean and the smell went out like a cat. In the morning, the air in the house held nothing but dust and lemon and the faint sweetness of something very old that had burned a long time ago and stopped. I turned on the radio to the station I liked. A man talked about the weather in Ozona. The static behaved. I drove to work and parked by the bay, and when I came back out, it was only my car under the sun. My windshield clean, my wipers asleep, my hands free of char. The road to Fort Stockton was just a road. It held what I put on it. That was enough to keep me going. That and the understanding that somewhere out there, in the corner of the night where the light does not reach and the wind smells like a red flower, someone is carrying a little heat looking for a place to put it. And some nights it chooses me and some nights it moves on. I was westbound on 90, chasing the tail end of evening. The sky the color of a bruise spreading over the desert. My phone had no bars for an hour and a half and the radio could only pull a preacher out of Midland and a station from Del Rio drifting in and out when the wind laid down. I had left Alpine after a late shift at the motel, a favor for my sister in Fort Stockton. A drop-off of a cardboard box of baby clothes someone donated, the kind of errand you take on when the people you love run out of time and gas money. The road from Alpine to Marathon is a long yoke laid over land that refuses fences. It was that time when headlights bite at everything. You pass the silhouettes of yucca and move through them like a ship through kelp, everything scraping at the edges of your sight. I had coffee in a thermos that tasted like a burnt walnut. The dash lights in my old Corolla had a dim spot where the speedometer between 40 and 50 went half blind. I knew the path like everyone who lives out there knows it. Past the bladed shoulder where a jackrabbit could be a dog and a coyote could be a rumor. Drop a gear at the little kink in the road where runoff cuts through the caliche. Ease back up for the flat stretch toward the water tanks that rise like ghost turrets over Marathon. Before I reached town, I hit the hazard lights from a wreck a half mile ahead. You could see the red diamonds blinking against the dark, then a rolling line of flares guttering in the wind. There is a smell that comes with ruined cars. It is a hot iron tang, coolant and oil and the sweet plastic of airbags, and it hangs low like someone breathing into your face. I slowed to a crawl. A Brewster County deputy waved people to the right with a flashlight. The main road had been shut on account of a semi jackknifed across both lanes at the curve before the first marathon exit. The deputy looked like he had been carved out of the landscape, the same economy of motion, the same patience. He pointed his light and said to take the detour. The arm motion was a loop, a scoop of his wrist that made a crescent in the night. He said it would swing south past the mulched brush piles behind the gauge and back to 90 beyond the wreck. I nodded and followed the orange staked signs that had been hurried into the dirt. I have driven detours on back roads that felt like a lesson in faith. The cones are there and you trust them. You trust the truck ahead. You trust the tail lights in front of you not to vanish into a stock tank. We turned off the highway onto a narrow county road where the asphalt sank and rose like a mattress. 10 cars at least when I glanced in the mirror. People had that tight posture they get when you take away their control. The wind blew tumbleweed like stray thoughts. I followed the white stripe that ran along the edge. The paint new and reflective, a kindness in the dark. The curve was gentle to start. The land fell away on the right where a shallow arroyo cut through. The grass pocked by yucca stumps, a couple of mesquite twisted into the shape of old men who had sat too long in bad chairs. The first time I came around the bend, I noticed a sign that said 45 mph with a bullet hole through the 5. Someone had aimed to make it permissive. My hands rolled the wheel and the car settled. Then another sign, a yellow diamond with a black swoop like a ladle, warning about the curve ahead. I took it and the road offered me back to the straight. I could see the glow of flares across the flats, a dull heartbeat in the distance, and I eased past a patch of wildflowers that had no business being awake. A truck up ahead braked because the curve came again. He took it and I took it. The same bullet hole sign, the same mesquite like old men in bad chairs, the same hollow in the land where the arroyo cut down, and the same sweep of hand on the wheel. I told myself I noticed it because all curves in West Texas look kin. The wind is an artist with one gesture, and it does it again and again until the dirt agrees. By the 4th pass, I stopped telling myself anything. The road laid its hand on me and turned me like a lazy river. The truck ahead ran his brake lights. In a sharp panic blink, and I knew the moment the driver's fear met mine, time folded its arms. The yellow diamond came back. The bullet-holed 45 looked punched by a man who did not like being told what to do. My coffee tasted like metal. In my rear view, the string of cars held together with the kind of temporary patience you hear inside a church when the power goes out. I could feel the heat of them on me. It is easy to say what you would do. You would stop and walk and see where the trick had been laid. You would turn around and go back to the deputy and tell him his detour had teeth. You would laugh and say you almost had yourself going there. But the curve asked for a small thing, and it asked with that polite persistence of a nurse waking you for a midnight dose. Take the turn, dear, and we will set you right. Someone tried to force it. A white SUV, 2 cars behind me, pulled out, surged, left and gunned the engine, deciding that all maps could be rewritten if you pressed hard enough. The arroyo and the mesquite and the yellow sign watched him go. He drew even with me, his passenger a woman with short hair clutching the handle above the window. He edged ahead. He reached the dreaded bend and the world contracted to that one motion. His brake lights flared to demon red, and he vanished into the turn. And for a second he was gone, and every hair on my arms rose with the hope that he had found a way out. Then he slid back into place in front of the truck as if nothing had happened. Same dust on his bumper, same bug smear on his taillights. I could see the woman put her hand over her mouth. The driver slapped the wheel. He jerked right and stopped half on the shoulder and half in the lane. Doors opened. The woman stood in the road in the chill of the desert night and turned in a slow circle like she was trying to spot a magician's thread. The wind fluttered the hem of her denim jacket. She looked at me and I saw it clear as any daylight expression. She had the face you make when you meet your own name carved into a tree you have never seen before. I rolled my window down and called to her. She shouted back that we had already passed the same dead roadrunner and the same shredded tire, that she had counted 3 stars in a triangle above the water tank, and they were still there and unchanged, too low in the sky to be new. The driver of the SUV walked to the yellow diamond and put his palm on it like he was checking if a stove was hot. He shook the post. It did not move. He took a picture with his phone, although the bars were stubborn as ever and no one was going to see it except his future self. Behind us a horn sounded, not angry, just a reminder that we were a part of a bigger thing we did not control. He got back in. The woman got back in. The white SUV slotted into the procession. The wind laid down for a beat. And in that quiet, the arroyo spoke the language dry earth does when it has not been given water for too long. A sift and a whisper, and the memory of a flood. I am a practical person. You do not survive by being romantic about the desert. You bring water and a spare belt and a flat of oil. You learn the mile markers like cousins. I told myself there had to be a road that looked the twin of this one, and we had dipped between them. A lazy figure 8 that local ranchers kept cut through their land. Something you would only know about if you worked fence or ran cattle or dated a boy who did. The detour signs had been stuck in dirt. Anyone could move them and make it a joke. But the deputy's face and the radio chatter I had heard as I rolled past the flares did not feel like a night with room for jokes. I took the curve again, and with it the message that there was nothing to do but keep moving. The dead roadrunner lay in the same slump of feathers, head tucked under wing as if it had put itself to bed. The shredded tire hung off the far shoulder on a mesquite thorn like a black wreath. A beer can, the old aluminum faded to a ghost brand, rolled a foot and stopped. The curve came and we went through it, all of us moving with the patience of cattle at a gate. The SUV driver pulled as far over as he could and I eased past. As I drew even, the woman rolled the window down and said she could hear something when the bend took them. She said it was a voice under the tires that told her not to fight it. Her eyes had the wide white look of a person staring at a storm on radar, who does not want to believe the colors. I told her to turn up the radio when she felt it. She said they had. She said the preacher from Midland turned to static at the sign and came back when they were through. She said she had tried to call her sister and the phone lit and showed a number with no area code, a number that started with a 9 and went on until it filled the whole screen like a field of seed. That would put a cold kernel into anyone. I wanted proof to pick up and turn in my hand, something I could carry past Dawn and hold up to other people with the delight of one-upping their stories. I got the more ordinary terror, which is the sense that something very old has decided for a while to coil itself around your modern life and see what it feels like. The procession slowed further and for a minute we were all stopped. Diesel fumes from the truck ahead drifted back and pinned themselves to the inside of my throat. The sky thickened with a blackness that made me think of the bottom of a well. I rolled the window back up and the Corolla turned into a drum containing me and the sound of my breathing. I could hear a faint hiss from the vents. The temperature needle sat politely in its usual spot. I checked the dash clock and it said 12:16. I felt sure it had said that a few minutes ago. I tapped it with a fingernail and it did not mind. A man in a straw hat walked past, moving along the shoulder toward the head of the line with his hands in his pockets. He had the limber gait of a rancher who can walk 6 miles before breakfast and tell you how the grass will be in October. He put his head into the window of one car, then another, and he came to me and said in a calm voice that he had driven this back way since the 80s, and it had never had a loop in it. He said every couple of years there was talk in town about the bend behind the gauge and how sometimes it went strange on you. He said people would take the detour when there was a wreck or a run of tar snakes in summer, and the curve would lay down like it always did. Then someone would come back and say they had been stuck until sunup and could only get free when the first light touched the road like a lit match. He said he had never believed it, but he could feel it now. Not like a story, but like weather. He asked me if I wanted him to bless my hood. There was no mockery in it. I said yes. He put his palm on the metal and murmured something about giving up control and trusting the road to take us home in the morning. He did not make a show of it. He held his hat to his chest and went on. At some point, fear climbs down out of your throat and sits in your lap and you can pet it. It gets familiar? The curve came and I didn't give it my attention. I watched my hands on the wheel and in them a memory came up bright and harsh. Of a night when my father missed the exit after a basketball game in Midland and turned around and the same empty strip malls kept coming until he pulled over and we cried. Both of us, because sometimes ground resists you and you are not strong enough to insist. I had not thought of that in years. The road carried me around and set me down, and the flares pulsed like a patient heartbeat, and I thought I could sit there all night and be no worse for it. The clock kept saying 12:16, and then one time it said 12:17, and I felt a tremble all up my arms as if someone had whispered a joke only I understood. The white SUV crept up alongside again, and the woman leaned with both hands on the window ledge and shouted that she could see the same piece of cloud over the water tank every time they came around. She said it looked like a sheep with its head down. People measure time by strange yardsticks when clocks will not. The trucker 2 cars ahead climbed down and walked back and told us he had a cooler full of Gatorade if anyone needed it. He said you do not want to run out of electrolytes in a place where the wind will sand you right down to your intentions. He made a joke of it, and we were grateful. We were all becoming neighbors. That is what terror does in the open. It makes a village of strangers who share a fence for a while. I tried to turn around. I admit that. The asphalt was narrow and the shoulder crumbly, but I had a small car and a stubborn streak. I eased left and cut right and started to swing a 3-point turn when my headlights landed on the Arroyo and the Yucca and the yellow diamond that I was sure should have been behind me. The curve was where I had been trying to put my rear bumper, and the black drop of the Arroyo opened its mouth. I straightened and took my place in line like a child who has been caught leaving the room before dinner. My hands were shaking and I did not want anyone to notice, so I put them on my thighs and stared ahead. Someone behind me had started to cry. It was a quiet, steady crying, the kind that has no audience and does not ask for one. In the edge of my hearing, the hiss in the vents changed pitch and for a second sounded like a voice. It was the kind of voice you hear when you fall asleep with a television on and it drifts over your dreams and tells you something you should remember in the morning and do not. I turned the radio dial deliberately. The Midland preacher cut in mid-sentence and told me about a valley of bones. He had a kind voice and he was not wrong about the shape of it. Then there was the border station with a love song warbling in a language my grandmother would have been happy to hear. Then static that filled the car like snow. I stopped and the static softened until it was almost a whisper. The yellow diamond came again and I drove through. The static eased, then returned. A rhythm. I made myself count the seconds from sign to sign and I lost my place twice and then I stopped counting. The rancher in the straw hat had gone on ahead to see if there was any change. He walked like a man who had decided he would use his feet until the earth confessed something. There was a place in the curve where light pooled in a way that did not belong to my headlights or anyone else's. It was a soft bruise color and it lay right at the apex where every tire brushed a little more paint off the lane line. I saw it first out of the corner of my eye and then I looked straight at it and it was nothing but the light my halogens threw, and I felt the foolish relief you feel when you prove a suspicious shape to be a coat on a chair. The next pass it was there again and my eyes wanted to slide past it. I made myself keep my gaze on it and my hands on the wheel, and a thought nudged me like a dog. It said this is not a trap built for you. It said the loop is a thing made for the person who wants to insist. I have never been much good at insisting. The voice in the vent agreed with me for a moment and then went back to being air with an opinion. Sometime after a number of trips through the bend that I could not honestly estimate, the line moved more freely. The clock said 12:24 and then it said 12:19, and I knew it was not going to be a good companion. The rancher came back from the front with a face like someone who has seen only what he expected. He said the head of the line still fed back on itself and that the best thing any of us could do was keep our hands soft on the wheel and our foot steady on the gas and let the earth wear down, whatever it was wearing down in us. I asked him if sunrise was the key and he nodded. He said dawn is a kind of permission. He said the loop is a thing of night and repetition is the instrument it plays. I liked him for putting it like that. It turned the road into an old auntie humming to herself at the sink, not a monster with teeth. I thought about my sister in Fort Stockton, a woman who lives like a field of sunflowers with every head turned toward whatever is honest in the sky. I thought about the box of clothes in my back seat and how they still contained the warmth from Alpine even though I had been driving long enough for ordinary warmth to leave. I thought about the people in the line with me, their stories and their errands. Someone headed to a shift at the prison, someone going to see a mother in a small house with a tin roof, someone who had a fight with a lover and wanted to put miles between them and the sound of that last sentence. I had the sudden and unnerving urge to honk the horn 3 times and see who honked back. It would have been a way to prove we were still able to choose. I did not do it. The curve came and I turned as if I was trying to memorize the motion for a dance. A child began to sing in one of the cars behind me. It was a little voice, a girl maybe, singing something about a green bottle and a wall and counting down as if inventory could be taken away until only a memory stood up. Her mother shushed her once and then let it go. The sound threaded the dark and laid it out like a new tablecloth. The white SUV pulled over again, and this time the woman got out and knelt at the edge of the lane. She put her fingers on the painted line and then pressed them to her lips. I do not know why I felt like she was doing it for all of us. The road took another gasp of our attention and bent it into the curve and let it go. In the desert night, you can tell when morning is moving under the horizon. The air changes first. It is like you are standing behind a curtain and someone has started a movie on the other side, and you can feel the flicker. The wind began to smell, faintly of creosote, and the gasoline tang of the wreck ahead, thinned to a suggestion. The flares pulsed with less authority. The rancher stopped his walking and stood still and put his hands on his hips and faced east. I copied him because sometimes aping an older man's posture gives your spine something to do besides buckle. Lights far off that had been ranch houses became stars again, and stars that had been mistaken for navigation lights became themselves. The clock said 12:25, and then it said 4:57. It did this without apology. The little girl finished her bottles and began again at 10. The yellow diamond came one more time and I turned into it, and as I came out of the arc, the first smear of pink laid itself over the black. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no ripping sound. No slate cracked under our tires to reveal lava. There was a thinning and then the straight held. The road went on. My hands did not change what they were doing, and yet the world had softened its grip. The flares ahead were blue smoke and then they were ash. The deputies' lights were off. The wreck had been cleared. I could see the long length of the jackknifed semi only in the echo in the air and the tracks it had chewed into the shoulder. The detour signs leaned as if they had given up whatever job they were hired for and wanted to nap. The people in line did not cheer. They did not speed. They straightened and they moved because that is what we do when a door opens. As I passed the place where the curve released me, I put the car on the shoulder and stepped out. The cold shocked my knees. The sky had a smear of orange like something had been cleaned and not quite finished. I walked to the yellow diamond and put my hand on it. The metal was cool. It had no special tremor. The bullet hole in the 45 sign looked like it had been made a long time ago by someone practicing something they should not. The arroyo lay quiet and intimate. The mesquite looked like old men who had decided to forgive their chairs. The white SUV glided past. The woman inside pressed her palm to the window and I did the same without moving toward her. It felt like a ritual in a place that collects them. I got back in and the Corolla woke with an unbothered purr. The radio found the station from Del Rio and gave me a song that made a promise it could not keep. I put the thermos to my lips and found the coffee had cooled into something almost good. The road to Fort Stockton opened itself like a favor. The rising sun laid a thin blade over the land and all the maps on the hood of the world lined up and shook hands. Later, after the box of baby clothes had been delivered and my sister had stood there in her kitchen and looked at me in that way she has that says she can feel when I have been near something that took a long look back at me, I tried to explain about the loop. She said she had heard. She said people in Marathon treat it the way you treat an ant who talks to birds. You let her, because sometimes the birds tell her something useful, and because it is not your job to stop them. She asked me if I was all right. I said I was. I said it like a person sitting inside a house that has been moved an inch in the night. The pictures are still straight somehow, and the doors still latch, but you know you will forever feel that new seam when you run your hand along the wall. For weeks after, whenever I approached a curve, any curve anywhere, I felt a small pulse at the base of my skull, and my hands went softer on the wheel. I learned to think of loops differently. The habits that keep you upright are a kind of curve, and you take them over, and one day something in you that has been standing at the apex in the dark asks if you will honor it with your patience. You do, or you don't. The road will take you into morning either way, but it will change whether you know you were carried or whether you insist you did the carrying. Sometimes, late, when I drive past Marathon and the water tanks stand up like Tin Kings and the gauge sits with its quiet, civilized face. I turn down the county road on purpose and I let the car find that bend. I do it without telling myself why. It is a kind of reverence for repetition and for the people I met in that brief village that the night made. I take the curve once, and once is all it is. The yellow diamond lifts its chin. The bullet hole in the 45 is still a private joke. The arroyo keeps its counsel. I drive out into the day with the understanding that some detours are not about getting around trouble. They are about meeting the shape of the world where it has worn itself smooth. And if I ever have to take it, after dark, and the air tastes like iron and the Midland preacher tells me about bones and the clock plays its little games, I will keep my hands soft and my foot steady and trust that the desert will carry me in a circle until I am ready to point at the sunrise and agree to leave.